Hello, beautiful soul. I'm Aurora, and welcome to Twin Flame Journey, a space where we explore the deeper meaning behind soul connections, divine timing, and the path that leads two hearts back to union. If you've been feeling the signs, you're in the right place.
What if he does not return because he finally got everything figured out, but because something inside him was triggered so deeply that the old version of him could not survive it? What if the reason he comes back different is not because time passed, but because the soul trigger changed what time could not? A soul trigger is not ordinary pain. It is not simple missing. It is not just nostalgia, regret, or curiosity. It is the moment something touches the hidden wound, the buried love, the avoided truth, and the unhealed masculine pattern all at once. And suddenly he cannot stay the same. He may have tried to move on. He may have tried to distract himself. He may have tried to tell himself the connection was not that deep. He may have tried to act like silence gave him control. But then the trigger happens. Maybe he sees her no longer chasing. Maybe he feels her energy pull back. Maybe he realizes she is not the same woman anymore. Maybe a memory returns with a force he cannot explain. Maybe he loses access to the softness he once assumed would always be there. And something breaks open. Not loudly. Not perfectly. But deeply. For the first time, he is not only missing her. He is seeing himself. He sees where he ran. He sees where he hid. He sees what he took for granted. He sees how much of the connection she carried while he stayed protected behind fear. And that is why he may return different. Because he is not returning to repeat the same conversation. He is returning after the mirror has shown him something he cannot unsee. But here is the deeper question. Is he returning different because he has truly awakened? Or is he returning because the trigger made him uncomfortable? Is he coming back with responsibility? Or only with longing? Is he ready to meet her in truth? Or is he only trying to regain access to the energy he lost? Stay with me, because in this video, we are going deep into the soul trigger that changes him. Why it shakes the masculine mask, why it awakens regret, and how to know whether his return is real transformation or just a temporary emotional reaction. Because when the soul is truly triggered, a man does not only come back. He comes back having met the part of himself he was running from. Chapter 1. What a soul trigger really is. A soul trigger is not just a feeling. It is a collision with truth. That is where this journey begins. Because when we say, why he returns different after this soul trigger, we are not talking about ordinary nostalgia. We are not talking about a lonely night where he suddenly misses the attention. We are not talking about curiosity, boredom, ego, or the simple discomfort of realizing someone is no longer chasing him. A soul trigger is deeper than that. A soul trigger reaches beneath the surface personality and touches the hidden wound. It reaches beneath the masculine mask and touches the part of him he has been protecting. It reaches beneath logic, pride, silence, and emotional distance, and lands directly on the truth he has been trying not to face. And when it lands there, something changes. Not always immediately. Not always visibly. Not always in a way he knows how to explain. But inside, the old defenses begin to shake. The old story begins to lose power. The old numbness begins to crack. The old version of him that could avoid, dismiss, delay, and pretend suddenly finds itself standing in front of something it cannot easily control. That is a soul trigger. It is not simply pain. It is pain with revelation. It is not simply missing. It is missing with recognition. It is not simply regret. It is regret that forces him to see himself. A normal emotional trigger may make him react. He may feel jealous, uncomfortable, anxious, or wounded. He may want reassurance. He may want access. He may want to know whether she still cares. But a soul trigger does something more sacred and more disruptive. It does not only make him feel. It makes him see. He sees the pattern. He sees the avoidance. He sees the silence. He sees the emotional distance he used as protection. He sees the difference between what he felt and what he actually showed. And that seeing is what begins to change him. Because a man can miss someone and still remain the same. He can feel lonely and still return with the same old energy. He can feel regret and still avoid accountability. He can want access again and still not be ready to love differently. But when the soul is triggered, the return is not only about getting her back. It becomes about facing the man he became while he was running. That is the deeper truth. The soul trigger confronts him with himself. Maybe the trigger happens when she stops chasing. For a long time, he may have felt her energy reaching toward him. She explained. She waited. She softened. She tried to understand. She kept the connection alive with her hope, her emotional labor, and her willingness to see beneath his fear. But then her energy changes. She no longer reaches in the same way. She no longer explains her worth. She no longer waits in pain. She no longer offers her softness without boundaries. She no longer carries the connection from both sides. And suddenly, something inside him is activated. At first, he may think he is only reacting to her absence. But if the trigger goes deeper, he begins realizing that her absence is showing him something about himself. It is showing him what his silence created. It is showing him what he took for granted. It is showing him how much of the emotional space she had been holding while he stayed protected, passive, or unclear. That is a soul trigger. It takes an external event and turns it into an internal mirror. The event may be simple. She stops texting. She sets a boundary. She moves differently. She becomes quieter. She no longer responds with the same emotional urgency. She seems peaceful in a way that no longer depends on him. But inside him, the event becomes massive. Because it touches the hidden place where he knows he did not fully show up. It touches the place where he knows he was not as indifferent as he acted. It touches the place where he knows he received more than he gave. It touches the place where he knows he used silence to avoid discomfort, while she was left carrying the uncertainty. This is why a soul trigger can feel destabilizing. It does not let him stay in the comfortable lie. The lie that he did nothing wrong. The lie that his distance was neutral. The lie that she would always remain available. The lie that he could keep avoiding emotional responsibility without consequence. The lie that he could feel deeply in private while showing very little in reality and still call that love. The soul trigger interrupts those lies. Not through punishment, through truth. And truth, when it has been avoided for a long time, can feel like a shock. He may not know why he feels unsettled. He may not know why her silence is suddenly louder than her words. He may not understand why her calm feels more confronting than her chasing ever did. He may try to distract himself, dismiss it, rationalize it, or tell himself he is simply annoyed that the dynamic changed. But the trigger keeps working, because it has touched the soul. A soul trigger does not always shout. Sometimes it whispers the same truth until he cannot ignore it anymore. You cared more than you admitted. You hid more than you realized. You let her carry too much. You called her love pressure because you were afraid of being responsible to it. You called your silence peace because you did not want to admit it was avoidance. That kind of inner truth can be hard for the divine masculine to face. Because the masculine mask often depends on control. It depends on being able to explain things logically, contain emotion, maintain distance, and avoid looking too exposed. But a soul trigger bypasses the mask. It goes straight to the emotional truth beneath it. This is why he may feel shaken. Not because she did something dramatic, but because something inside him recognizes the truth of what happened. A soul trigger often activates several layers at once. The first layer is the emotional layer. He misses her. He remembers her energy. He feels the absence of her warmth. He notices that the space feels different now. He realizes that the comfort he once took for granted is no longer available in the same way. But if the trigger is truly soul level, it does not stop there. The second layer is the mirror layer. He begins seeing himself in the situation. Not only, she is gone. But, what did I do while she was here? Not only, I miss her. But, did I honor her? Not only, I want to hear from her. But, why did I make her carry so much before I was willing to speak? This mirror layer is where awakening begins. Because the focus moves from her absence to his accountability. And then comes the third layer, the wound. This is often the deepest part. The soul trigger may reveal the wound he has been protecting for years. The fear of vulnerability. The fear of being seen. The fear of needing someone. The fear of being abandoned if he opens. The fear that love will demand more from him than he knows how to give. He may begin to understand that his avoidance was not random. It came from somewhere. Maybe he learned early that feelings were unsafe. Maybe he learned that needing someone made him weak. Maybe he learned that silence was safer than honesty. Maybe he learned that if he stayed emotionally distant, he could not be rejected as deeply. So he built a mask. And for a while the mask worked. It kept him composed. It kept him protected. It kept him from feeling too much. It kept him from having to explain the parts of himself he did not understand. But the soul trigger touches the wound beneath the mask. And suddenly, the mask no longer feels as powerful. Because he starts seeing that what he called strength may have been fear. What he called peace may have been avoidance. What he called independence may have been a way to never fully risk his heart. That realization can change him. Because once he sees the wound, he can no longer pretend the pattern is simply how he is. He begins to understand. I pull away when I feel exposed. I go silent when I do not know how to be vulnerable. I call it confusion when I am afraid of the truth. I let distance protect me, but it also kept me from love. That is a soul trigger. It brings awareness to the pattern that once operated unconsciously. And the moment a pattern becomes conscious, the old self begins to lose control. Not completely. Not instantly. But enough for a new choice to become possible. That is why he may return different after a soul trigger. Because he is not returning from the same level of unconsciousness. He may still be afraid. He may still be imperfect. He may not have all the answers. But if the trigger has truly changed him, he returns with more awareness than he had before. He may be more careful, more humble, more reflective, more aware of her boundaries, more aware of his own avoidance, more willing to admit what he once defended. And that difference matters. Because the old version of him may have returned only when he felt lonely. But the triggered version returns after being confronted with truth. The old version may have returned to feel her warmth again. But the awakened version returns knowing he must respect the warmth he once took for granted. The old version may have returned expecting her to understand him. But the changed version returns with a deeper understanding of how much she already carried. That is the difference between a temporary emotional reaction and a soul-triggered awakening. A temporary emotional reaction says, I miss you. I want you back. I do not like this space. A soul-triggered awakening says, I see something now. I see myself differently. I see what I did not honor. I see that if I come back the same way, I will only repeat what hurt you. That is the kind of difference this video is exploring. But we must be careful. Not every return after a trigger is a transformed return. Sometimes the ego gets triggered, not the soul. The ego may return because it lost access. It may return because it wants reassurance. It may return because it does not like being replaced, forgotten, or no longer chased. It may return because the absence bruised his pride. It may return because her boundary made him feel out of control. That is not the same as awakening. Ego trigger says, I want access back. Soul trigger says, I understand access requires responsibility. Ego trigger says, why did you stop reaching? Soul trigger asks, why did I depend on you reaching? Ego trigger says, I miss how you made me feel. Soul trigger says, I see how I failed to honor how you felt. This distinction is essential. Because the divine feminine must not confuse intensity with transformation. A man can come back emotional and still not be different. He can come back passionate and still not be accountable. He can come back saying he misses her and still not understand what he did. He can come back triggered and still be operating from the same old wound. So the real question is not only, did he come back? The real question is, what part of him came back? The ego? Or the awakened self? The fear of losing access? Or the humility of seeing truth? The longing for comfort? Or the willingness to become responsible? That is the discernment she must hold. Because a soul trigger is powerful, but it is only the beginning. It opens the door. It shows him the truth. It cracks the mask. It brings the hidden wound to the surface. But he must choose what he does next. Will he grow from the trigger? Or will he only react to it? Will he let it humble him? Or will he protect his pride? Will he return to meet her in truth? Or return to restore the old access? That choice determines whether he is truly different. And for the divine feminine, this chapter carries a sacred message too. Do not make the soul trigger your new excuse to abandon discernment. Just because he was triggered deeply does not mean he is fully transformed. Just because he returns differently does not mean trust is automatically rebuilt. Just because he has felt the truth does not mean he has learned how to live from it consistently. A soul trigger may awaken him, but responsibility must mature him. That is what matters. You can honor that something deep may have shifted in him. You can sense that he has been touched by the mirror. You can feel that he is not returning from the same surface-level place. But you still need to watch whether his awareness becomes action. Does he take accountability? Does he respect your boundaries? Does he communicate with clarity? Does he stop expecting you to carry the emotional labor? Does he show consistency after the trigger passes? These questions protect your heart. Because true awakening does not disappear when the emotional wave calms down. True awakening becomes behavior. It becomes humility. It becomes changed choices. It becomes respect for what he once took for granted. It becomes the willingness to meet the connection in a healthier way. That is what a soul trigger is meant to create. Not just intensity. Transformation. Not just regret. Responsibility. Not just longing. Truth. So as we begin this journey, remember this. A soul trigger is the moment life touches the hidden place he has been avoiding. It may come through her silence, her absence, her boundary, her energy shift, or the realization that she is no longer available to the old pattern. But the real power of the trigger is not that it makes him miss her. It makes him meet himself. And once a man meets himself honestly, he cannot return exactly the same. That is where Chapter 1 leaves us. With the understanding that a soul trigger is not ordinary emotion. It is a deep activation that touches his wound, his buried feelings, his avoided truth, and his masculine pattern all at once. It breaks through the comfort of denial and creates the first real possibility of returning with a different energy. And if this chapter spoke to you, stay with me for Chapter 2. Because next we are going deeper into why the trigger breaks through his mask. And how the moment it reaches beneath his controlled image may become the moment he can no longer pretend he was untouched. Chapter 2. Why the trigger breaks through his mask. The masculine mask can hide many things, but it cannot hide forever from a soul trigger. That is where this chapter begins. Because for a long time, he may have looked controlled from the outside. Calm, distant, unbothered, maybe even completely detached. He may have seemed like the kind of man who could walk away, stay silent, avoid the conversation, disappear into work, keep busy, and act as if nothing inside him had been touched. But appearances are not always truth. Sometimes the most controlled man is not the man who feels nothing. Sometimes he is the man who has spent years learning how not to show what he feels. That is the masculine mask. It is the version of him that says, "I am fine," even when his chest is heavy. It is the version of him that says, "It was not that deep," even when the memory still follows him. It is the version of him that says, "I do not care," even when his silence is full of everything he cannot say. It is the version of him that chooses distance, not because the connection meant nothing, but because the connection reached something he did not know how to protect. And for a while, the mask may work. It may help him function. It may help him avoid vulnerability. It may help him stay in control. It may help him keep the truth away from the surface. It may help him move through life without having to explain the emotional storm beneath the quiet. But then the soul trigger arrives, and the mask begins to crack. Because a soul trigger does not speak to the mask. It speaks to the hidden heart beneath it. That is why it is so powerful. The trigger does not ask, "What are you pretending?" It asks, "What is true?" It does not ask, "How controlled can you look?" It asks, "What are you still carrying?" It does not ask, how far can you run? It asks, what part of you is tired of running? And when those questions begin rising inside him, the mask loses some of its authority. He may still try to wear it. He may still act calm. He may still stay silent. He may still tell himself that the trigger is not affecting him. But something inside him knows. Something has been touched. And once the soul has been touched, performance becomes harder. This is why the trigger breaks through his mask. It reaches the place the mask was built to protect. The wound, the tenderness, the longing, the fear of being seen, the shame around needing love, the regret over what he avoided, the hidden recognition that he was never as untouched as he pretended to be. A normal emotional moment may bounce off the mask. He can dismiss it. He can rationalize it. He can distract himself. He can return to the old story. But a soul trigger goes underneath. It does not stay on the surface long enough for the mind to explain it away. It moves into the deeper body, the deeper heart, the deeper memory. It stirs something below his conscious control. Maybe it comes when he sees that she is no longer chasing. Maybe it comes when her silence feels peaceful, not wounded. Maybe it comes when he realizes she has changed. Maybe it comes when he feels the absence of her energy and understands that the old access is gone. Maybe it comes through something simple, a song, a place, a scent, a phrase, a dream, a memory of the way she looked at him before he knew how to receive that kind of seeing. And suddenly the mask is not enough, because the trigger does not only remind him of her, it reminds him of himself, the self he was with her, the self he hid from her, the self he wanted to be, but was too afraid to become, the self that felt tenderness and then buried it beneath distance. That is what breaks the mask. Not just missing her, recognizing himself in the mirror of what happened. He may remember a moment where she was open and he withdrew. He may remember a conversation where she offered honesty and he responded with silence. He may remember the warmth he received and the little clarity he gave in return. He may remember how she tried to meet him in truth, while he kept hiding behind control. And for the first time, he may not be able to make the memory harmless. Before, he might have said, that was just how things happened. But now the trigger says, look again. Before, he might have said, I needed space. But now the trigger asks, did you need space or did you avoid emotional responsibility? Before, he might have said, she was too intense. But now the trigger asks, was she too intense or were you unprepared for honesty? Before, he might have said, I did not know what to do. But now the trigger asks, and what did your silence make her carry? These questions are difficult, because the mask is designed to prevent this kind of self-honesty. The mask wants to keep him safe from seeing the impact of his own avoidance. It wants to keep him from feeling regret too deeply. It wants to maintain the image of control, because control feels safer than vulnerability. But the soul trigger does not care about the image. It cares about the truth. And truth, once it rises, can make the mask feel heavy. He may feel exhausted by pretending, exhausted by staying unreadable, exhausted by acting like he has no emotional reaction, exhausted by needing to look unaffected when something inside him has been quietly affected for a long time. This exhaustion is often the first sign that the mask is cracking, because the mask requires energy. It takes energy to avoid. It takes energy to suppress. It takes energy to keep saying, I am fine, when the heart is saying something else. It takes energy to keep choosing distance when the soul is asking for honesty. At some point, the performance becomes more painful than the truth. That is when the trigger begins to break through. He may not collapse externally. He may not confess immediately. He may not reach out right away. But internally, something becomes unstable. The old identity starts to tremble. The identity of the man who does not need anyone. The man who does not get attached. The man who does not care. The man who can stay silent forever if he wants to. The man who can walk away and never look back. The soul trigger challenges that identity. It asks, if you do not care, why do you still feel this? If you are free, why does the silence feel heavy? If you are untouched, why does her absence disturb you? If you are at peace, Why do you keep returning to the memory? These questions do not allow the mask to remain unquestioned. And that is the beginning of awakening. Because a mask can survive denial. But it cannot survive honest questioning forever. The more he questions the mask, the more he begins to see it for what it is. Not his true self. A defense. A survival strategy. A way of protecting wounds he may not have known how to heal. And this realization can be both painful and freeing. Painful because it shows him that he has been hiding. Freeing because if the mask is not who he is, then he is not trapped in it forever. He can choose differently. But before he can choose differently, he must feel what the mask has been covering. That is the hard part. Because beneath the mask may be grief. Grief for what he did not say. Grief for what he took for granted. Grief for the softness he did not honor. Grief for the version of himself who wanted connection, but did not know how to remain open inside it. Beneath the mask may be shame. Shame that he was afraid. Shame that he stayed silent. Shame that he received love without knowing how to return it. Shame that he may have hurt someone who was only trying to love him. Beneath the mask may be longing. Longing for her energy. Longing for the safety he felt, but did not fully trust. Longing for the part of himself that came alive around her. Longing for the chance to meet the connection differently. And beneath all of that may be love. Not always the mature, embodied love that knows how to communicate and take responsibility yet. But love as recognition. Love as tenderness. Love as the feeling he tried to bury because it made him feel exposed. The soul trigger reaches all of this. And that is why it breaks through the mask. Because the mask can block words. It can block behavior. It can block vulnerability from being seen by others. But it cannot fully block what the soul recognizes as true. He may try. He may become even quieter at first. He may pull back harder. He may act more indifferent than before. He may try to reassemble the mask because the trigger makes him feel too exposed. This is important to understand. Sometimes when the mask first cracks, he does not immediately become softer. Sometimes he becomes more defended. Because the first instinct after exposure is often protection. If the trigger touches the wound, he may panic. If it brings up regret, he may try to numb it. If it shows him the truth, he may want to reject the truth before it changes him. So he may retreat temporarily, not because nothing is happening, but because too much is happening underneath. But if the trigger is truly working, he cannot fully return to the old numbness. He can try to cover the crack. But he has seen the crack. And once he sees it, the mask is no longer seamless. It no longer feels like truth. It feels like something he is choosing to wear. That awareness matters. Because the moment he knows he is wearing a mask, the mask begins losing power. Before he may have believed, this is just who I am. Now he begins to wonder, is this who I am, or is this how I protect myself? That question is sacred. Because it separates identity from defense. He is not his silence. He is not his avoidance. He is not his emotional distance. He is not his inability to speak. He is not the coldness he uses when he feels exposed. Those are defenses. And if they were learned, they can be healed. This is the deeper invitation of the soul trigger. It does not only break his mask to make him feel pain. It breaks the mask so he can find the man underneath it. The man who can feel. The man who can tell the truth. The man who can be present. The man who can stop using distance as protection. The man who can love without pretending love does not affect him. But that man cannot rise while the mask remains unquestioned. So the trigger questions it. Again and again. Through memory. Through absence. Through her changed energy. Through the quiet realization that the old version of him is no longer enough. And this is why he may return different after the trigger. Because if the mask has cracked, he cannot return with the same false confidence. He cannot return pretending he was unaffected. He cannot return acting like nothing happened if something inside him has finally seen the truth. He may return more humble. Because the mask of pride has been challenged. He may return more careful. Because he sees what carelessness cost. He may return more open. Because hiding has become exhausting. he may return more accountable. Because the trigger showed him that his silence was not harmless. This does not mean he returns perfectly. A cracked mask is not the same as a fully healed heart. But it does mean something has shifted. The old performance has weakened. And when the performance weakens, truth has more room to speak. That is why the divine feminine must be discerning. If he returns after a soul trigger, do not only listen to how emotional he seems. Listen for humility. Does he recognize the mask? Does he understand that he hid? Does he acknowledge the ways he avoided truth? Does he stop pretending his distance had no impact? Does he come with the willingness to be real, not just the desire to regain comfort? Because if he returns with only emotion, the mask may still be intact. He may be triggered, but not transformed. He may miss her, but still hide. He may want access, but still avoid accountability. But if the soul trigger has truly broken through the mask, something in his energy will feel different. Less defensive. Less performative. Less focused on controlling the narrative. More willing to admit uncertainty. More willing to hear her truth. More willing to stop pretending he was untouched. That difference is important. Because the awakened masculine does not need to look invincible. He needs to be honest. He does not need to have a perfect speech. He needs to stop hiding behind the old one. He does not need to become emotionally flawless overnight. He needs to become willing to meet the truth without disappearing. That is what the trigger is trying to awaken. And for her, this chapter carries another message. Do not try to break his mask for him. That is not your job. You cannot force a soul trigger. You cannot explain the mask away. You cannot love him hard enough to make him remove it. You cannot chase him into vulnerability. The mask breaks when truth reaches a place inside him that he can no longer avoid. And that must happen from within. Your job is not to shatter his defenses. Your job is to stop losing yourself while he decides whether he will keep wearing them. This is sacred. Because many divine feminines believe that if they can just be soft enough, patient enough, understanding enough, they can make the mask safe enough to fall. But sometimes her overgiving only gives the mask more time. It gives him the comfort of her softness without the responsibility of his own honesty. The mask breaks more deeply when she stops feeding the old pattern. When she stops chasing. When she holds boundaries. When she lets the space speak. When she stops making his hidden heart more important than her visible peace. That is often what allows the soul trigger to reach him. Because now, he cannot hide behind her effort anymore. He must face himself. And if he faces himself, the mask begins to crack. That is the sacred truth of Chapter 2. The soul trigger breaks through his mask because it touches what the mask was built to protect. It reaches the hidden wound, the buried tenderness, the regret, the longing, and the truth he tried to hide beneath control. The mask may have helped him appear unaffected. But the trigger reveals that being unaffected was never the full truth. And when the mask cracks, he begins to see himself differently. Not as the man who feels nothing, but as the man who has been afraid to feel openly. Not as the man who is always in control, but as the man who used control to avoid vulnerability. Not as the man who never cared, but as the man who cared in ways he did not know how to honor. And once he sees that, he cannot return exactly the same. That is where Chapter 2 leaves us. With the understanding that the soul trigger does not destroy the masculine. It removes the illusion that the mask was his true strength. And if this chapter spoke to you, stay with me for Chapter 3. Because next we are going deeper into the moment he realizes he cannot go back to the old story. And why after the trigger, the sentence, "I do not care," no longer feels believable even to him. Chapter 3. The moment he realizes he cannot go back to the old story. There comes a moment after the soul trigger when the old story no longer works. That is where this chapter begins. Because before the trigger, he may have been able to explain everything away. He may have been able to tell himself that the connection was not that deep, that the silence was necessary, that the distance was healthy, that he was simply protecting his peace, that he had moved on, that he was fine. And for a while, those explanations may have sounded convincing. Maybe they helped him sleep. Maybe they helped him stay distracted. Maybe they helped him avoid guilt. Maybe they helped him protect the masculine mask. Maybe they helped him keep the connection in a small box that did not threaten his sense of control. But after the soul trigger, the old story begins to crack. The same explanations do not land in the same way. He says, "It was nothing." But the memory still has weight. He says, "I do not care." But his body reacts when he thinks of her. He says, "I am fine." But the silence does not feel peaceful anymore. He says, "I made the right choice." But something inside him keeps asking, then why does it still feel unfinished? This is the moment he realizes he cannot go back to the old story. Not because someone forced him to admit the truth. Not because she sent another message. Not because the outside world changed dramatically. But because something inside him has changed. The soul trigger has awakened in knowing that the old narrative can no longer fully silence. And once that knowing rises, denial becomes harder. This is a very important stage. Because the divine masculine may not immediately know what the new truth is. He may not have the words. He may not yet understand whether he wants to return, apologize, repair, or simply sit with what has been revealed. He may still feel confused. He may still be afraid. He may still resist the emotions that are rising. But one thing becomes clear. The old explanation is no longer enough. The story that protected him now feels incomplete. The story that helped him stay distant now feels hollow. The story that made him feel in control now feels like something he was using to avoid a deeper truth. That realization can be deeply unsettling. Because the old story was not just a thought. It was a shelter. It helped him avoid vulnerability. It helped him avoid regret. It helped him avoid the painful possibility that he had pushed away something meaningful because he did not know how to hold it. It helped him avoid seeing the ways his silence affected someone who was trying to meet him with love. So when the old story collapses, he may feel exposed. He may feel as if there is nowhere to hide from himself. Before, he could say, "She was too intense." But now the soul trigger asks, "Or were you afraid of emotional depth?" Before, he could say, "I needed space." But now the soul trigger asks, "Or did you disappear because you did not know how to communicate fear?" Before, he could say, "I did not want drama." But now the soul trigger asks, "Or did you avoid the honest conversation that could have brought peace?" Before, he could say, "It was not the right time." But now the soul trigger asks, "Was timing the truth, or was timing the safest explanation?" These questions begin to dismantle the old story, layer by layer. And he may resist that dismantling. Because part of him may still want the old story to be true. It would be easier if it was nothing. Easier if he did not care. Easier if the silence had no consequence. Easier if she was simply too emotional, and he was simply being rational. Easier if distance meant freedom and not fear. But the soul trigger does not come to make things easier. It comes to make things honest. And honesty often begins by making the old lie uncomfortable. That is why this stage can feel like inner conflict. One part of him may still defend the old story. Another part of him begins seeing through it. One part says, "Do not think about it." Another part asks, "Why does it keep returning?" One part says, "You are better off without that emotional intensity." Another part asks, "Was it intensity or was it intimacy?" One part says, "Stay in control." Another part asks, "How much of your life has been controlled by fear?" This inner dialogue is a sign that the trigger has gone deep. Because a man who is completely asleep does not argue with his own mask. He simply believes it. But when awakening begins, the mask becomes questionable. The old thoughts no longer feel like absolute truth. The old defenses no longer feel clean. The old reasons begin to sound less like wisdom and more like protection. And that is the beginning of change. Because the old story can only rule him while he believes it completely. The moment he doubts it, the soul has entered the conversation. This is where the divine masculine may begin replaying certain moments differently. A moment he once dismissed may suddenly feel important. A conversation he once avoided may suddenly feel unfinished. A message he ignored may suddenly feel heavier. A boundary she set may suddenly make more sense. A silence he created may suddenly reveal the emotional weight she had been carrying. This is how the old story begins breaking apart. Not through one dramatic realization, but through the return of details. Small details that now carry truth. The way she tried to explain her heart. The way he changed the subject. The way she asked for clarity. The way he gave distance instead. The way she softened around his fear. The way he still did not meet her with the same courage. Before, he may have placed these moments under the old story. She wanted too much. She was emotional. I needed space. It was complicated. But now, after the trigger, those same memories asked to be seen with more honesty. Maybe she wanted clarity because he gave confusion. Maybe she became emotional because the connection felt unsafe. Maybe he needed space, but he did not communicate it with care. Maybe it was complicated, but he used complication to avoid responsibility. This is a hard thing to see, because it means the old story was protecting him from accountability. And once he sees that, he cannot fully go back. He may try. He may distract himself. He may tell himself he is overthinking. He may push the thoughts away and return to routine. But the old story has lost its innocence. It no longer feels like truth. It feels like an excuse. And that is when real awakening becomes possible. Because the collapse of the old story creates an empty space. And in that empty space, a new truth can emerge. Not a fantasy. Not self-punishment. Not immediate certainty. But a more honest truth. Maybe the truth is, I did care. Maybe the truth is, I was afraid. Maybe the truth is, I took her softness for granted. Maybe the truth is, I called her intensity too much because I did not know how to receive love without feeling exposed. Maybe the truth is, I kept hiding behind silence because speaking honestly would have required me to be vulnerable. These truths may arrive slowly, and they may not feel comfortable, but they feel real. That is the difference. The old story felt safe. The truth feels real. The old story protected the mask. The truth begins freeing the soul. The old story kept him from feeling too much. The truth allows him to finally understand what he has been feeling all along. And this is why he may return different after the soul trigger. Because if he can no longer believe the old story, he cannot return with the same old attitude. He cannot return pretending everything was casual. He cannot return acting like her silence had no meaning. He cannot return expecting the old dynamic to resume without acknowledging what has shifted. He cannot return with the same emotional vagueness if the trigger has shown him the cost of vagueness. If he returns from this stage, his energy may feel different because the old story is no longer fully guiding him. He may be less defensive, because he knows defensiveness is not the whole truth. He may be more humble, because he has seen where his old explanation was incomplete. He may be more reflective, because he is no longer able to dismiss everything quickly. He may be more careful, because he realizes that what he says and does now matters. This does not mean he becomes perfectly awakened overnight. The old story may still call him back. Old patterns are familiar. Old defenses are comforting. Old narratives are easier than emotional responsibility. But once the soul trigger has shown him the lie, returning to the lie takes more effort. And that effort becomes exhausting. He may begin to realize that it is harder to pretend than to admit the truth. Harder to keep acting unaffected than to face the fact that he was affected. Harder to keep defending the distance than to ask why he needed so much distance from something that awakened him. Harder to keep saying, I do not care, than to admit that care existed, even if it scared him. This is the moment where the masculine begins to mature. Because maturity begins when he stops needing the story to make him innocent and starts wanting the truth to make him whole. That sentence matters. The old story often exists to make him innocent. I had no choice. She was too much. It was bad timing. I was just protecting my peace. I did not know what else to do. Some of these things may contain pieces of truth. Maybe he really was overwhelmed. Maybe timing really was difficult. Maybe he genuinely did not know how to handle what he felt. But partial truth can still become a hiding place if it avoids responsibility. The soul trigger forces him to see the whole truth. Not only, I was overwhelmed, but I was overwhelmed and I still should have communicated better. Not only, I needed space, but I needed space and I did not handle that space with enough care. Not only, I was afraid, but I was afraid and I let fear create confusion. This is where the old story becomes a mature truth. The old story excuses. Mature truth understands and takes responsibility. The old story says, I acted this way because I was wounded. Mature truth says, I was wounded and now I must learn not to wound through my wounds. That is a major shift, and it is often born from the soul trigger. Because the trigger shows him that avoiding responsibility may have protected him from discomfort, but it did not protect the connection. It did not protect her heart. It did not protect his own soul from the weight of unfinished truth. This is why the old story cannot remain. It is too small for what the soul has seen. The old story says, move on. The soul says, learn first. The old story says, forget her. The soul says, understand what she reflected. The old story says, you did nothing wrong. The soul says, look with honesty, not shame. The old story says, stay the same. The soul says, this happened to wake you. And if he listens, the trigger becomes a turning point. Not because the past can be erased. Not because everything becomes easy. Not because a return is automatically safe. But because he begins to relate to the past differently. He stops seeing the connection only as something that disrupted him and begins seeing it as something that revealed him. He stops seeing her only as someone who wanted too much and begins seeing her as someone who mirrored where he was not yet emotionally available. He stops seeing his distance only as protection and begins seeing it as a pattern that may have cost him intimacy. That new perspective changes the man. Because a man who sees differently can choose differently. Not always immediately, but eventually if he has courage. This is why the divine feminine must watch not only for his return, but for the story he returns with. Does he return still telling the old story? Does he still frame everything as if he was simply misunderstood? Does he still blame her intensity, her needs, her emotions, her boundaries? Does he still present his silence as harmless and his distance as pure logic? Or does he return with a new truth? Does he say, I see now that I avoided? Does he say, I understand why that hurt? Does he say, I was afraid but I should have communicated? Does he say, I cannot keep pretending this did not matter? Does he say, I know I cannot come back the same way and expect you to trust me? That is where discernment lives. Because a man who returns with the old story is not returning different. He is returning familiar. A man who returns with a new truth may not be perfect, but he is showing signs that the trigger has done something deeper than create temporary emotion. He has seen something, and what he has seen has changed the narrative. That is the sacred difference. The divine feminine must not be seduced only by his emotion. She must listen for the story beneath it. Is he telling a story that protects his ego? Or a truth that opens responsibility? Is he returning to escape loneliness? Or returning because he has confronted himself? Is he seeking comfort? Or offering accountability? These questions matter because the soul trigger is only valuable if it produces truth. Not drama. Truth. And for her, this chapter carries another message. Sometimes the soul trigger changes him because your energy changed first. When you stopped chasing, the old story could no longer continue in the same way. When you stopped explaining, he could no longer rely on your words to keep the connection emotionally alive. When you chose yourself, he could no longer pretend his avoidance had no consequence. When you became different, the story he told himself about you had to change too. But remember, you did not shift to change his story. You shifted to stop betraying your own. That is your power. Because while he may be realizing he cannot go back to the old story, you may also be realizing you cannot go back to the old version of yourself. The version who overexplained. The version who waited in pain. The version who accepted silence as something to decode. the version who made his potential more important than your peace. That old story must collapse too. His old story may have been, I do not care. Your old story may have been, if I love harder, he will awaken. His old story may have been, distance is peace. Your old story may have been, chasing is devotion. His old story may have been, it was nothing. Your old story may have been, my worth depends on whether he finally sees me. Both stories must be transformed. Because the soul trigger is not only for him. It is for both souls. It asks him to stop hiding from truth. It asks you to stop abandoning yourself for love. It asks him to become responsible. It asks you to become discerning. It asks him to leave the mask. It asks you to leave the chase. That is how the connection becomes a catalyst. Not just for reunion, for awakening. And this is where chapter 3 finds its sacred truth. The moment he realizes he cannot go back to the old story is the moment denial begins to lose its power. He can no longer say, it was nothing, I am fine. Or, I do not care, without feeling the lie beneath the words. The soul trigger has shown him too much. It has revealed his pattern, his fear, his regret, and the emotional truth he tried to reduce. And once the old story collapses, he is standing before a choice. He can create another excuse. Or he can begin living from truth. He can rebuild the mask. Or he can let the mask teach him what it was hiding. He can return to the connection with the same old narrative. Or he can return different because he has finally seen what the old narrative cost. That choice belongs to him. And your choice belongs to you. Do not go back to your old story either. Do not tell yourself you must accept a return just because he is emotional. Do not tell yourself that hidden feelings are enough if visible responsibility is still missing. Do not tell yourself that love requires you to abandon the woman you became while healing. You have a new truth too. And your truth matters. That is where chapter 3 leaves us. With the understanding that the soul trigger does not only make him feel something. It makes the old lie impossible to live inside comfortably. And if this chapter spoke to you, stay with me for chapter 4. Because next we are going deeper into why her energy shift becomes the trigger, and how the moment she changes becomes the mirror he can no longer ignore. Chapter 4. Why her energy shift becomes the trigger. Sometimes the soul trigger is not a dramatic event. Sometimes it is her peace. That is where this chapter begins. Because the divine masculine may expect to be triggered by conflict, confrontation, emotion, or a painful conversation. He may expect the difficult moments to come when she is asking questions, when she is expressing hurt, when she is reaching for clarity, when she is trying to explain the connection one more time. But sometimes, the trigger that changes him is not her reaching. It is her no longer reaching. Sometimes it is not her words. It is her silence. Sometimes it is not her pain. It is the moment he realizes her energy no longer feels available to the old pattern. That is why her energy shift becomes the trigger. Because for a long time, he may have known her through a certain energetic rhythm. She was the one who felt deeply, the one who tried, the one who held hope, the one who kept making emotional space, the one who could sense the truth behind his silence and still offer compassion, the one who saw the hidden heart beneath the masculine mask. And maybe part of him depended on that more than he admitted. He depended on her patience. He depended on her softness. He depended on her emotional availability. He depended on the feeling that even when he was distant, she still cared. He depended on the invisible reassurance that she was still somehow holding the connection. But then her energy shifts. She stops chasing. She stops over-explaining. She stops waiting in the same way. She stops sending her life force into his silence. She stops making his avoidance the center of her emotional world. And suddenly the field changes. He may not understand it at first. He may simply feel that something is different. The silence feels different. The space feels different. Her presence feels different. Even her absence feels different. Because this time, she is not gone in the old way. She is not gone while secretly standing at the same door, hoping he opens it. She is not quiet while still energetically begging to be chosen. She is not detached as a strategy, waiting for him to panic and come closer. This time, she has returned to herself. And that is what triggers him. Not because she is trying to hurt him, but because her self-return reveals the truth of the old imbalance. Before her energy shifted, he could remain passive and still feel connected. He could stay silent and still feel her emotional presence. He could be unclear and still sense that she was trying to understand. He could delay responsibility while she kept translating his fear into meaning. But when her energy returns to herself, he can no longer hide inside her effort. That is the trigger. He feels the absence of what he did not fully honor. He feels the space she is no longer filling. He feels the silence she is no longer softening. He feels the connection without her carrying it from both sides. And in that space, something in him begins to awaken. Because now he has to feel what was his all along. His longing, his fear, his avoidance, his lack of movement, his unfinished truth, his responsibility to decide whether he will rise or continue hiding. Her energy shift becomes the trigger because it removes the emotional cushion that allowed him to stay asleep. This is not punishment. It is reality. When she was overgiving, her energy may have protected him from the full consequence of his absence. Every time he went silent, she searched for meaning. Every time he pulled away, she held hope. Every time he became vague, she tried to understand. Every time he delayed, she waited a little longer. And because she carried so much, he did not have to carry enough. But now she is not carrying the same way. And the weight returns to him. That is why he may suddenly feel disturbed. Not because she is doing something to him, but because she is no longer doing something for him. She is no longer managing the emotional field. She is no longer protecting the connection from his silence. She is no longer making his avoidance look like mystery. She is no longer using her compassion to make his lack of clarity feel acceptable. Her energy shift exposes what was already there. The imbalance, the passivity, the silence, the emotional responsibility he had avoided. And when something is exposed, it can no longer hide in the same way. This is why he may return different after this soul trigger. Because the woman he is returning to is not the same energetic woman he left. He may have left the woman who chased. But now he feels the woman who receives. He may have left the woman who explained. But now he feels the woman who knows. He may have left the woman who waited in pain. But now he feels the woman who chooses peace. He may have left the woman who made his potential more important than her own reality. But now he feels the woman who has returned to her body, her standards, and her self-respect. This difference can shake him. Because he can no longer rely on the old version of her to keep the old version of him comfortable. The old version of her may have made room for his fear. The new version makes room only for truth. The old version may have overextended to keep the bond alive. The new version lets the bond reveal whether it can live without her self-abandonment. The old version may have softened every silence. The new version lets silence show what it is. This shift becomes a mirror he cannot ignore. And the mirror asks, what did you do with her softness when it was available? How did you respond when she was still reaching? What did you assume would always be there? Why did it take her returning to herself for you to feel what you were losing? These questions can create a deep soul trigger because they pierce through his ego. His ego may want to say, she changed. But the soul asks, why did she have to? His ego may want to say, she stopped caring. But the soul asks, or did she finally start caring for herself? His ego may want to say, she is cold now. But the soul asks, or is her warmth no longer available to your avoidance? These questions matter, because they move him from blaming her shift to understanding his role in why the shift became necessary. That is awakening. The unawakened masculine may resent her change because it removes his comfort. The awakening masculine may respect her change because it reveals her self-worth. The unawakened masculine says, she is not the same anymore. The awakening masculine says, she is not the same because the old dynamic was hurting her. That is a major difference. Because if he truly begins to see her shift from the soul, he will not only miss the old access. He will understand the cost of that access. He may realize that the version of her who chased was not simply loving. She was also tired. The version who explained was not simply expressive. She was also trying to be heard by someone who kept avoiding. The version who waited was not simply loyal. She was also slowly abandoning her own peace. And when he understands that, regret may rise. Not just regret that she changed. Regret that he did not honor her before change became survival. That regret can become part of the soul trigger. Because her energy shift does not only show him who she is now. It shows him who he was then. It shows him how passive he became while she overfunctioned. It shows him how much he received without matching her courage. It shows him how long he allowed her to stretch herself across the distance he created. This is why her peace can feel more confronting than her pain. When she was in pain, he could still feel her attachment. When she is at peace, he feels her freedom. And her freedom is the trigger. Because it shows him that she is no longer imprisoned by the old dynamic. She may still love, but she is not chasing. She may still remember, but she is not waiting in the same way. She may still feel the connection, but she is no longer making that connection more important than her own soul. That kind of freedom changes how he sees her. It makes her energy harder to dismiss. Because her peace is not performing. It is not begging. It is not asking to be understood. It is simply existing. And a woman who exists in her own truth can become the most powerful mirror a man has ever faced. He may ask himself, why does her calm affect me more than her chasing did? Why does her silence feel more powerful now? Why do I feel drawn when she is no longer pulling? Why does her self-respect make me feel the places where I lacked responsibility? These questions are the trigger working through him. Because her energy shift has altered the polarity. Before, her energy may have pursued. Now her energy receives. Before, her energy may have tried to convince. Now her energy knows. Before, her energy may have been open without protection. Now her softness has boundaries. And this creates a new invitation for him. Not an invitation to be chased. An invitation to rise. Because he cannot meet her new energy through old avoidance. He cannot meet her groundedness with vague signals. He cannot meet her self-respect with inconsistent effort. He cannot meet her silence by waiting for her to speak first. If he wants to come back now, he must bring something real. Truth. Accountability. Presence. Humility. The willingness to admit that the old way was not enough. This is what her energy shift triggers. It triggers the question of whether he is ready to become different. Not whether he misses her. Not whether he wants her attention. Not whether he wants access to the comfort she used to provide. But whether he is willing to become the kind of man who can meet a woman who has returned to herself. That is the deeper test. Because a man can miss the woman who chased. But can he honor the woman who no longer does? A man can want the softness that overgave. But can he protect the softness that now has boundaries? A man can long for the energy that once orbited him. But can he respect the energy that now belongs to itself? That is where the soul trigger becomes transformative. Because it shows him that her shift is not only about his loss. It is about her awakening. And if he truly loves her, he must not want her to shrink back into the version of herself that was hurting. He must learn to meet the healed version. The stronger version. The softer but clearer version. The version who still has a heart, but no longer hands it to inconsistency. This requires growth. Because her energy shift may activate his old wounds too. He may feel abandoned. He may feel rejected. He may feel like she has pulled away from him. He may feel the ache of losing the emotional role he once had in her life. But if he is awakening, he must learn the difference between abandonment and boundaries. She is not abandoning him. She is abandoning the pattern. She is not rejecting his soul. She is rejecting the dynamic that required her to lose herself. She is not punishing him with peace. She is choosing peace because chaos became too expensive. That distinction can change him. Because it teaches him that love is not proven by how long someone suffers. Love is not proven by how much someone chases. Love is not proven by how many times someone explains the same pain. Love is not proven by how much access he receives while offering little clarity. Love becomes sacred when it is honored. And her energy shift says, honor it or lose access to it. Not as a threat, as a truth. Because every sacred thing has a boundary. And this is what he may finally understand. Her energy was sacred. Her softness was sacred. Her patience was sacred. Her emotional labor was sacred. Her belief in him was sacred. And he may have treated sacred energy like it would always be there. Now that it has returned to her, he begins to understand its value. This is why the trigger can change him forever. It teaches him through absence what presence tried to teach him through love. When she was present, he may not have fully listened. Now that her energy has shifted, he feels the lesson. And the lesson is clear. Do not take for granted what is offered from the soul. Do not delay truth until the heart that waited has learned how to stop waiting. Do not confuse a woman's patience with endless permission. Do not assume that because she sees your potential, she will live forever in the pain of your absence. These lessons can become turning points if he lets them. But again, he must choose. Her energy shift may trigger him, but it cannot transform him against his will. He may feel the trigger and become defensive. He may tell himself she changed too much. He may resent her boundaries. He may protect his ego by convincing himself that he does not need her, that she became cold, that the connection is over because she stopped playing the old role. Or he may let the trigger humble him. He may ask, what did I fail to honor? He may ask, what did her change reveal about my lack of presence? He may ask, how do I approach a woman who has chosen herself? He may ask, can I return with truth instead of expecting her to return to the old version of herself? That choice separates ego reaction from soul awakening. And for the divine feminine, this chapter carries a message of deep clarity. Your energy shift may become his trigger, but it should not be your strategy. Do not shift so he will awaken. Shift because you are awakening. Do not stop chasing so he will feel your absence. Stop chasing because your presence belongs to you. Do not become silent so he comes back different. Become silent when your soul needs peace more than your fear needs reassurance. Do not set boundaries to control him. Set boundaries because your softness deserves protection. This is essential. Because if your entire energy shift is secretly built around his reaction, then the chase is still happening under the surface. True shift is different. True shift says, I return to myself whether he notices or not. I choose peace whether he understands or not. I protect my heart whether he rises or not. I stop participating in the old dynamic because I am no longer available to abandon myself. That is the shift that changes everything. And if it triggers him, let it trigger him. Let him feel the space. Let him face what he took for granted. Let him see the woman you have become. Let him decide whether he will rise to meet truth. But do not make his process your home. Your home is you. Your body. Your breath. Your peace. Your purpose. Your soft heart held by strong boundaries. That is your sacred center. And the man who returns different after a true soul trigger will understand that he cannot ask you to leave that center again. He will not try to pull you back into the old pattern. He will not punish you for becoming peaceful. He will not resent you for protecting your heart. He will recognize that your shift was necessary. And he will approach with humility. That is how you know the trigger has done deeper work. Not because he comes back emotional, but because he comes back respecting the woman who changed. Not because he misses the old access, but because he sees the sacredness of the new boundary. Not because he wants the chase to resume, but because he is ready to stop running. That is the sacred truth of Chapter 4. Her energy shift becomes the trigger because it removes the emotional cushion that once allowed him to avoid himself. When she stops chasing, stops explaining, stops overgiving, and returns to her own peace, he can no longer hide inside her effort. Her new energy reflects his silence, passivity, and lack of responsibility back to him. It shows him what he took for granted and what he must become if he wants to meet her now. And that trigger may change him forever. But the shift changes her first. That is where Chapter 4 leaves us. with the understanding that her peace can become the mirror, her silence can become the trigger, and her self-respect can become the doorway where he either awakens into responsibility or reveals that he is still attached to the old pattern. And if this chapter spoke to you, stay with me for chapter 5. Because next we are going deeper into the regret that hits when he sees what he took for granted, and why the loss of old access can finally make him understand the sacredness of what she once offered freely. Chapter 5. The regret that hits when he sees what he took for granted. Regret does not always arrive when love is gone. Sometimes regret arrives when access is gone. That is where this chapter begins. Because for a long time, the divine masculine may have received her energy without fully understanding the sacredness of it. He may have received her softness, her patience, her compassion, her emotional labor, her willingness to understand, her ability to see beneath his mask. And yet he may not have realized how rare all of that was while it was still being offered. When something is always there, the unawakened part of a person can begin to treat it like it will always be there. Her messages, her warmth, her forgiveness, her hope, her emotional availability, her belief in the version of him he had not yet become. He may not have consciously meant to take it for granted. But he did, because he assumed the door would stay open. He assumed her softness would keep returning. He assumed that even if he stayed silent, even if he remained vague, even if he pulled away, even if he delayed truth, some part of her would still be there holding the connection, waiting for him to finally become ready. And then the soul trigger happens. Her energy shifts. She stops chasing. She stops explaining. She stops giving unlimited access. She stops making excuses for his emotional absence. She stops allowing her heart to remain endlessly available to uncertainty. And suddenly, he begins to feel what he did not fully value while it was present. This is where regret begins. Not always as an immediate confession. Not always as a message. Not always as tears, apology, or visible remorse. Sometimes regret begins quietly. A memory returns differently. A silence feels heavier. A moment he once dismissed now feels sacred. A small act of her love suddenly becomes impossible to ignore. He remembers the way she tried. He remembers the way she listened. The way she waited. The way she believed. The way she softened around his fear. The way she kept seeing him even when he did not fully show himself. And now, because her energy is no longer reaching in the same way, he realizes that what she offered was not ordinary. It was sacred. That realization can hit him deeply. Because regret often arrives when the soul finally recognizes the value of what the ego dismissed. The ego may have said, "She is too emotional." But regret says, "She was emotionally brave." The ego may have said, "She is asking for too much." But regret says, "She was asking for clarity because I kept giving confusion." The ego may have said, "She will be there." But regret says, "She was there until being there began to cost her herself." And that is a painful truth to face. Because when he sees what he took for granted, he is not only missing her. He is seeing the gap between what she offered and what he gave in return. She offered presence. He offered distance. She offered understanding. He offered silence. She offered hope. He offered uncertainty. She offered emotional courage. He offered protection behind the mask. And now, after the soul trigger, the imbalance becomes visible. He may feel a weight in his chest that he cannot easily explain. He may replay old conversations and finally hear what she was really saying. He may remember the times she asked for emotional safety. And instead of seeing those moments as pressure, he now sees them as a heart trying to be cared for. This is where regret matures. Because immature regret says, "I miss what she gave me." Mature regret says, "I see what I failed to honor." There is a difference. Missing what she gave is still centered on his comfort. He misses her attention. He misses her softness. He misses the way she made him feel seen. He misses the emotional warmth that made his world feel less lonely. But seeing what he failed to honor requires humility. It asks him to look beyond his loss and into her experience. What did it feel like for her to keep reaching into silence? What did it feel like for her to love someone who kept hiding? What did it feel like for her to offer softness and receive uncertainty? What did it feel like for her to carry hope while he avoided clarity? These questions are not easy, but they are necessary. Because if his regret is going to transform him, it must become relational. It must move from, I lost something, to I affected someone. It must move from, I want her back, to I understand why she had to pull back. It must move from, I miss access, to I respect the boundary that now protects what I once took for granted. That is the shift that tells you the soul trigger is doing real work. Because before the trigger, he may have seen her love through the lens of his own fear. Her depth felt like pressure. Her need for clarity felt like demand. Her emotional honesty felt overwhelming. Her consistency may have felt like something he did not know how to match. But after the trigger, he begins seeing differently. He sees that her depth was not the enemy. His fear of depth was. He sees that her clarity was not control. It was a request for emotional safety. He sees that her softness was not weakness. It was strength offered in a gentle form. He sees that her patience was not something to rely on forever. It was a gift with a limit. And when he sees this, regret begins to open his heart. Not the kind of regret that keeps him trapped in shame, but the kind of regret that invites him to become more conscious. Because shame says, I ruined everything, so I should hide. But conscious regret says, I see what I did, and I must become different. Shame collapses. Regret awakens. Shame makes him defensive. Regret makes him humble. Shame says, I am bad. Regret says, I must learn how to love with more responsibility. That is why regret can be sacred when it does not become self-punishment. It becomes a teacher. It teaches him that love is not something to appreciate only after distance has made it unavailable. It teaches him that a woman's softness is not endless simply because it is sincere. It teaches him that emotional labor should not be invisible just because she carried it quietly. It teaches him that silence has impact. It teaches him that delayed honesty can become pain in another person's body. And it teaches him that if he ever has the chance to return, he cannot return as the same man who took her presence for granted. That is why he may return different after this soul trigger. Because regret has changed the way he sees access. Before, access may have felt like something he could take, delay, leave, and return to. Now, access feels sacred. Before, her presence may have felt available. Now, her presence feels like something that must be earned through truth. Before, her softness may have felt natural. Now, he realizes it was a choice she made again and again, even while he was not fully meeting her. This realization can humble him. And humility is often the first real sign that the return is different. Because the old version of him may have returned casually. A message. A small opening. A little warmth. A vague attempt to test whether she was still there. But the humbled version understands that he cannot just walk back into her life as if nothing happened. He cannot assume she will respond like before. He cannot assume her heart is in the same place. He cannot assume her energy is still available to the old dynamic. If he comes back from true regret, he comes back with awareness that he is approaching something sacred, not something guaranteed. This changes his energy. He may be more careful with his words. He may be slower, not because he is playing games, but because he understands that rushing in with emotion and no responsibility could hurt her again. He may be more direct because he realizes ambiguity is part of what wounded the connection. He may be more respectful of her boundaries because he finally sees that those boundaries were necessary. He may say less but mean more. He may stop trying to control the narrative. He may stop making excuses. He may begin by acknowledging what he once avoided. I know I was silent. I know I did not show up clearly. I understand why you had to protect your peace. I see now that I took your patience for granted. These are not small words when they come from a man whose mask once depended on never admitting impact. But words alone are still not enough. This is important. Regret can make him speak. But responsibility must make him change. A man can regret deeply and still repeat the old pattern if he does not learn how to act differently. He can miss her and still become avoidant again when vulnerability returns. He can understand what he took for granted and still fail to build the emotional skills required to honor it next time. So regret must become practice. Practice in communication. Practice in consistency. Practice in emotional honesty. Practice in respecting boundaries. Practice in not disappearing when discomfort rises. Practice in bringing truth before silence becomes another wound. That is the difference between a man who returns emotional and a man who returns different. An emotional return says, "I feel bad." A different return says, "I am willing to do the work so I do not create the same pain again." An emotional return wants relief. A different return wants repair. An emotional return wants comfort. A different return understands that comfort cannot come before accountability. This is what the divine feminine must discern. Because when he returns after regret hits, his energy may be strong. He may feel sincere. He may seem softer than before. He may finally say things she wished he had said months ago, and that can touch her heart. But she must ask, is this regret becoming responsibility? Is this apology becoming behavior? Is this awareness becoming consistency? Is he seeing what he took for granted, or is he only afraid of losing access? These questions protect the woman she has become, because her heart may want to believe him. Her soul may feel that the trigger changed him. Her intuition may sense that something is different. But her wisdom must still watch how difference behaves over time. True change does not need to be dramatic. It needs to be consistent. True regret does not demand instant forgiveness. It honors the time needed to rebuild trust. True masculine accountability does not pressure her to reopen. It respects that the very softness he misses may need to feel safe again before it can return. That is how you know regret has matured. He does not rush her healing. He does not make her boundary about his pain. He does not ask her to comfort him for the guilt he feels. He does not return expecting the old access because he finally understands what that access cost her. Instead, he approaches with reverence. And reverence is different from desire. Desire says, "I want you." Reverence says, "I honor what you are." Desire says, "I miss what I had." Reverence says, "I understand what I failed to protect." Desire can be impulsive. Reverence is careful. And this is often what regret creates when it becomes sacred. He starts seeing her not only as someone he misses, but as someone he should have honored more deeply. He sees the emotional labor, the patience, the grace, the loyalty, the softness that kept offering warmth when his fear kept creating distance. And maybe for the first time, he understands that love is not measured by how much someone will endure for him. Love is measured by how consciously he can honor someone while they are present. This is the lesson. Do not wait until the soft heart becomes guarded to recognize its value. Do not wait until the door is protected to realize it was sacred. Do not wait until the woman becomes silent to finally hear what she was saying. Do not wait until she becomes different to understand that the version who loved you before deserved care too. These realizations can change the way he loves forever. Because if he truly absorbs them, he will not only regret what happened with her. He will become a different man in every connection. A man more aware of emotional labor. A man more careful with silence. A man more respectful of boundaries. A man less willing to take softness for granted. A man more responsible for the impact of his fear. That is real transformation. And that is why a soul trigger can be so powerful. It does not only show him that he lost access to her. It shows him the kind of man he became when access was still available. That is a deeper wound to face. Because he may realize, she was there, and I was not fully there. She was open, and I was guarded. She was honest, and I hid behind silence. She gave me something sacred, and I treated it like it would always remain. That truth can break the heart open. But sometimes the heart has to break open to become responsible. Not broken in a hopeless way. Broken open. Open enough to see. Open enough to feel. Open enough to understand that the old masculine way of avoiding, dismissing, and delaying cannot create the kind of love his soul actually wants. This is where regret becomes a doorway into maturity. But again, maturity is a choice. He can feel regret and still protect his pride. He can feel the ache and still stay silent. He can understand what he took for granted and still not have the courage to come forward. He can come forward and still fail to sustain the new awareness. That is why the divine feminine must not make regret the final proof. Regret is meaningful, but it is not the whole journey. Regret is the knock on the door. Responsibility is walking through it. Changed behavior is building a new home on the other side. And if he returns after regret, she must ask whether he is only knocking, or whether he is truly ready to walk. Because the woman who has shifted cannot reopen herself to a man who only feels regret, but has no intention of becoming accountable. She cannot give sacred access to someone who is still only reacting to loss. She cannot confuse his pain with readiness. His pain may be real, but is his growth real? That is the question. And she is allowed to take her time finding the answer. She is allowed to observe. She is allowed to listen. She is allowed to require consistency. She is allowed to protect the softness that regret now recognizes, but did not protect before. This is not punishment. It is wisdom. Because the same heart that was once taken for granted must now be honored with care. And if he is truly different, he will understand that. He will not resent her discernment. He will respect it. He will see that her boundaries are not obstacles to love. They are what make mature love possible. He will understand that if she is slower to trust, it is because the old version of him taught her to be careful. He will not demand the same openness he once mishandled. He will earn it, not through grand gestures, through steady truth, through showing up, through listening, through not disappearing, through communicating when fear rises, through honoring her peace even when his own longing becomes intense. That is what regret must become. Steady truth. Because regret that only speaks once may be sincere, but regret that transforms becomes consistent. And consistency is what heals what inconsistency damaged. This is the deeper message of Chapter 5. The regret that hits when he sees what he took for granted is not meant to trap him in the past. It is meant to awaken a new relationship with responsibility. It is meant to show him that love must be honored while it is present, not only mourned when it becomes unavailable. It is meant to teach him that feminine softness, patience, and emotional labor are sacred gifts, not endless resources. And for the divine feminine, this regret is not your responsibility to soothe. Let him feel it. Let him learn from it. Let him understand what he once avoided. Do not rush to comfort him so quickly that he never has to complete the lesson. Because sometimes, when a woman has carried too much, the most healing thing she can do is put it down and let him finally feel the weight of his own part. Not in cruelty. In truth. You are not here to punish him. But you are also not here to rescue him from the regret that may finally mature him. Let regret become his teacher. And let self-respect remain yours. Because if he returns different, he will not ask you to erase what happened just because he finally feels it. He will understand that your healing matters too. He will understand that recognizing your value late does not automatically restore access. He will understand that what he took for granted must now be approached with humility, patience, and consistent care. That is how you know the regret has become sacred. It does not make him entitled. It makes him humble. It does not make him demand. It makes him respect. It does not make him rush. It makes him steady. That is the energy of a man changed by the soul trigger. And if that energy is real, you will feel the difference not only in what he says, but in how he honors what he once failed to see. That is the sacred truth of Chapter 5. The regret that hits when he sees what he took for granted is the moment he begins to understand that her softness was sacred, her patience had a cost, and her emotional labor was never something he was entitled to receive without responsibility. He sees that what he once called pressure may have been love asking for safety. He sees that what he once assumed would stay open now has boundaries. He sees that access to her heart was a gift, and he did not honor it fully when he had it. And if he allows that regret to mature him, he may return different. Not because he is afraid of losing her, but because he finally sees the sacredness of what he once received. That is where Chapter 5 leaves us, with the understanding that regret can become a doorway into truth, but only if it becomes responsibility. And if this chapter spoke to you, stay with me for Chapter 6. Because next we are going deeper into why the trigger forces him to face himself, and how the moment he stops focusing only on her absence becomes the moment he finally sees the pattern he was running from. Chapter 6. Why the trigger forces him to face himself. The soul trigger does not only make him think about her, it makes him face himself. That is where this chapter begins. Because when the divine masculine is first triggered, he may believe the feeling is only about her absence. He may think he is unsettled because she pulled her energy back. He may think he is uncomfortable because she stopped chasing, stopped explaining, stopped giving him access to the softness he once received without fully honoring. At first, the trigger may look like missing her voice, missing her warmth, missing her attention, missing the comfort of knowing she was there, missing the way her energy made him feel seen, even when he was hiding. But if the trigger is truly a soul trigger, it does not stop there. It begins moving deeper. It begins turning the mirror around. And suddenly, the question is no longer only, why is she gone? The question becomes, who was I when she was here? That question is powerful, because it takes him out of the surface layer of longing and brings him into self-recognition. It asks him to stop focusing only on what he lost and start looking at how he showed up when the connection was still available. It asks him to stop making her absence the whole story and begin seeing his own role in why the dynamic became painful, distant, or imbalanced. This is why the trigger forces him to face himself. Because her absence may be the doorway, but his own reflection is what stands behind it. He may begin remembering moments he once avoided. A conversation where she asked for clarity and he gave silence. A moment where she softened and he pulled back. A time when she tried to reach his heart, but he retreated into logic, distance, or emotional shutdown. A place where she was vulnerable, and instead of meeting her vulnerability with care, he protected himself behind the mask. Before the trigger, he may have filed these moments under the old story. I needed space. I did not know what to say. She was too intense. It was complicated. I was just protecting my peace. But now, the trigger brings those same moments back with a different light. And under that light, the explanations begin to look incomplete. Maybe he did need space. But did he communicate that space with care? Maybe he did not know what to say. But did his silence leave her carrying confusion alone? Maybe she was intense. But was her intensity actually the emotional pressure created by his inconsistency? Maybe it was complicated. But did he use complication as a reason to avoid honesty? Maybe he was protecting his peace. But was part of that peace built on not having to face her pain? These questions are not easy. They are the questions the mask avoids. But the soul trigger brings them forward because he cannot truly return different until he sees the pattern he was running from. And the pattern is often deeper than one connection. This is where he may begin to realize that what happened with her was not random. It was not only about timing, chemistry, fear, or the intensity of the bond. The connection may have exposed something he has done before, a repeated emotional strategy, a familiar escape route, a defense he has used whenever closeness begins to feel too real. Pull away when the heart opens. Go silent when truth requires vulnerability. Act uncertain when the feeling becomes undeniable. Create distance when someone sees him too clearly. Call it logic when fear is actually making the decision. That is the pattern. And when he finally sees it, the trigger becomes more than emotional discomfort. It becomes awakening. Because a man can miss a woman and still never change. But a man who sees his pattern has been given the first key to transformation. He may begin to ask, why do I shut down when someone gets close? Why do I feel safer wanting love from a distance than receiving it in reality? Why do I become unavailable when I start feeling exposed? Why do I need the feminine to chase before I feel secure enough to stay passive? Why did I let her carry the connection instead of standing in it with her? These questions can shake him because they reveal that his issue is not simply with her. His issue is with intimacy. His issue is with vulnerability. His issue is with the parts of himself he has not learned how to bring into a real emotional space. And that is a difficult mirror. Because as long as he believes the problem is only outside of him, he can keep avoiding. He can say it was the wrong person, wrong timing, wrong intensity, wrong situation. He can say he was overwhelmed or misunderstood. He can keep moving from one experience to another without truly confronting the inner mechanism that repeats. But the soul trigger refuses to let him stay outside himself. It says, look inward. Look at what you do when love asks you to be honest. Look at what you do when tenderness reaches the guarded place. Look at what you do when a woman sees beyond your mask. Look at what you do when your heart wants connection, but your fear wants control. This is the confrontation. And it can feel like losing the ground beneath him. Because facing himself means facing the possibility that he was not simply protecting himself. He was also avoiding growth. He was not simply taking space. He was also leaving someone else in uncertainty. He was not simply being cautious. He was also letting fear decide what love could become. This does not mean he should drown in shame. Shame will not awaken him. Shame will only make him hide again. The soul trigger is not asking him to hate himself. It is asking him to tell the truth. There is a difference. Shame says, I am broken. Truth says, I have a pattern. Shame says, I ruined everything, so I should disappear. Truth says, I see what I did, and I can learn how to do something different. Shame says, I am not capable of love. Truth says, I need to heal the parts of me that run from love. This distinction matters because if he meets the trigger with shame, he may become more avoidant. He may feel exposed and then retreat. He may think, I am the problem, and then use that self-condemnation as another reason not to communicate, not to repair, not to grow. But if he meets the trigger with truth, the entire process changes. Truth gives him responsibility, and responsibility gives him power. Because once he sees that the pattern is his, he also sees that the healing must be his. He cannot place the entire weight of the connection on her energy anymore. He cannot make her the reason he feels exposed. He cannot make her softness the problem. He cannot make her boundaries the enemy. He must face the fact that something inside him learned to run from what his soul may actually want. That realization can become painful, but it can also become liberating. Because if the pattern is learned, then the pattern can be unlearned. If silence was a defense, then communication can be practiced. If distance was protection, then presence can be developed. If emotional shutdown was survival, then emotional maturity can be built. If he has been afraid of love, then he can learn how to meet love without treating it like danger. This is where the soul trigger becomes transformational. Not because it magically heals him, but because it makes unconscious behavior conscious. And consciousness is the beginning of choice. Before the trigger, he may have reacted automatically. He felt too much, so he withdrew. He felt exposed, so he went silent. He felt her depth, so he minimized the connection. He felt the weight of responsibility, so he called it pressure. But after the trigger, he may begin to catch himself. He may think, this is where I usually run. This is where I usually shut down. This is where I usually call it confusion. This is where I usually wait for her to reach first. This is where I usually protect my pride instead of speaking truth. That noticing is a turning point. Because the moment he notices the pattern while it is happening, he has a chance to choose differently. Maybe only slightly at first. Maybe he does not suddenly become perfectly communicative. Maybe he does not immediately have the courage to say everything he feels. Maybe he still needs time. But the difference is that he is no longer completely unconscious. He begins seeing the gap between who he has been and who he is being called to become. And that gap creates pressure. Not pressure from her. Pressure from his own soul. The soul says, you cannot keep living as the man who runs. You cannot keep using silence as safety. You cannot keep receiving love without learning how to protect it. You cannot keep calling fear wisdom. You cannot keep returning to the same pattern and expecting a different outcome. This is the inner pressure of awakening. It is not comfortable, but it is necessary, because the old masculine pattern often survives through comfort. It survives because distance feels safer than vulnerability. Silence feels easier than confession. Avoidance feels less risky than honesty. Emotional passivity feels less exposing than conscious participation. The soul trigger removes that comfort. It makes the old pattern feel heavy. He may notice that silence no longer feels powerful. It feels cowardly. He may notice that distance no longer feels free. It feels lonely. He may notice that control no longer feels strong. It feels like fear wearing armor. He may notice that waiting for her to reach no longer feels reassuring. It feels like a reminder of his own passivity. That is when transformation becomes possible. Because when the old pattern stops feeling comfortable, he becomes more open to a new way. But a new way requires humility. He must be humble enough to admit, I did not know how to stay present. I let fear make me passive. I expected her to keep the connection alive. I avoided my own emotions and made the silence carry what I could not speak. I need to become responsible for the impact of my absence. These admissions are not easy, but they are the language of a man being changed by truth. And this is why he may return different. Because a man who has faced himself returns with a different energy than a man who has only missed her. A man who has only missed her may return wanting comfort. A man who has faced himself returns with humility. A man who has only missed her may ask, do you still care? A man who has faced himself may say, I understand why you had to protect your peace. A man who has only missed her may want reassurance. A man who has faced himself knows he must offer accountability before asking for access. That is the difference. Facing himself changes the direction of the return. It is no longer only about what he wants from her. It becomes about what he must own within himself. This is one of the clearest signs that the soul trigger has gone beyond ego. The ego says, I do not like losing her. The soul says, I do not like who I became while I was avoiding love. That sentence can change a man. Because when he sees that his own behavior is not aligned with the man he wants to be, something inside him begins to reorganize. He may no longer want to be the man who makes a woman chase clarity. He may no longer want to be the man who hides behind silence. He may no longer want to be the man who only values softness after it has been withdrawn. He may begin to desire a new masculinity. A masculinity that is honest. A masculinity that is present. A masculinity that protects emotional safety. A masculinity that can feel deeply without disappearing. A masculinity that does not need the feminine to carry what belongs to him. This desire is sacred, but it must become practice. Because recognizing the pattern does not automatically heal it. He must practice staying when he wants to run. He must practice speaking when silence feels easier. He must practice asking for time instead of disappearing. He must practice taking responsibility without falling into shame. He must practice respecting boundaries instead of resenting them. That is the work. And if he is truly different, he will understand that the work is his, not hers. He will not return expecting her to regulate him. He will not expect her to explain his feelings to him. He will not expect her to soothe his guilt before he has taken accountability. He will not expect the connection to continue through her effort alone. He will understand. If I want to be part of her life, I must become responsible for my own emotional life. That is mature masculine awareness. And it is born when the soul trigger forces him to face himself. For the divine feminine, this chapter carries a message of discernment and peace. If he has been soul triggered, he may be going through deep self-recognition. He may be facing patterns, wounds, regret, and truths that he has avoided for a long time. But that process is his. You do not need to manage it. You do not need to interpret it for him. You do not need to turn his awakening into your assignment. Let him face himself. Because if you rush in too soon to soften the mirror, he may never complete the confrontation. If you explain too much, he may rely on your clarity instead of developing his own. If you carry his regret, he may not learn how to carry responsibility. You can have compassion, but do not interrupt the lesson. Sometimes the most loving thing is to allow someone to sit with the truth they have avoided. Not as punishment, not as revenge, but because truth is the only thing that can mature them from within. And while he faces himself, you face yourself too. Ask yourself, am I still tempted to rescue him from his own reflection? Am I still making his growth the center of my peace? Am I still hoping his trigger proves my worth? Am I still willing to accept emotion without consistency? These questions bring you back to your own awakening. Because the soul trigger may be forcing him to face himself. But it may also be inviting you to face the part of you that wants to turn his pain into proof that the connection was real. You do not need his pain to prove it. You do not need his regret to validate what you felt. You do not need his return to confirm your worth. Your worth was real before he saw it. Your love was real before he understood it. Your healing matters whether he rises or not. That is your freedom. If he returns different, let his difference reveal itself over time. Not in one emotional moment. Not in one apology. Not in one confession. But in the way he holds himself after the trigger. Does he communicate more honestly? Does he take responsibility without making you carry his shame? Does he respect the version of you who has changed? Does he stop expecting the old access? Does he show through action that he has faced more than just the fear of losing you? These are the signs to watch. Because facing himself is not just an inner event. It must become outer maturity. The soul trigger may force him to look inward. But the test is whether he lives outwardly from what he has seen. That is where real transformation begins. Not in the trigger itself, but in what he chooses after the trigger. Will he return to silence? Or speak with truth? Will he repeat avoidance? Or practice presence? Will he seek comfort? Or offer accountability? Will he want the old dynamic back? Or honor the new woman you have become? That choice is his. And your choice is whether you will require truth before reopening your heart. That is not cold. That is wisdom. Because the heart that has been taken for granted must learn to protect its sacredness. And a man who has truly faced himself will respect that protection. He will not rush it. He will not resent it. He will not make your boundary proof that you do not care. He will understand that your boundary is part of the truth he is finally learning to honor. That is the sacred truth of Chapter 6. The soul trigger forces him to face himself because it moves him beyond missing her and into recognizing his own pattern. It shows him the silence, avoidance, passivity, fear, and emotional distance he once used to protect himself. It asks him to stop blaming the connection, stop focusing only on her absence, and start seeing what he did while love was present. And if he has the courage to face that truth, he may return different. Not because he is suddenly perfect, but because he is no longer fully unconscious. He has seen the pattern. He has seen the mask. He has seen the cost. He has seen the man he no longer wants to be. And that seeing can become the beginning of a new choice. That is where Chapter 6 leaves us. With the understanding that the soul trigger is not only about her. It is the mirror that finally makes him meet himself. And if this chapter spoke to you, stay with me for Chapter 7. Because next we are going deeper into the difference between missing her and awakening through her. And why the most important question is not whether he misses you, but whether missing you has made him more honest, responsible, and awake. Chapter 7. The difference between missing her and awakening through her. There is a difference between a man who misses her and a man who awakens through her. That is where this chapter begins. Because after a soul trigger, the divine masculine may feel her absence intensely. He may think about her more than he expected. He may remember her voice, her energy, her softness, her patience, the way she listened, the way she saw beneath the mask, the way she kept holding space even when he did not know how to meet her fully. And yes, he may miss her. But missing her is not always awakening. Missing her may be the first layer. It may be the doorway. It may be the emotional signal that something inside him still feels connected. But missing her alone does not mean he has changed. A man can miss her and still return with the same avoidance. A man can miss her and still be afraid of accountability. A man can miss her and still want comfort more than truth. A man can miss her and still expect her to reopen the old door without him doing the inner work required to walk through it differently. That is why this chapter matters so deeply. Because the soul trigger may bring him back into contact with emotion. But the question is not only whether he feels something. The question is what the feeling does to him. Does missing her make him more honest? Or does it only make him restless? Does missing her make him more responsible? Or does it only make him want access again? Does missing her make him see his pattern? Or does it only make him want relief from the discomfort of her absence? This is the difference between missing her and awakening through her. Missing her is about the ache of losing contact. Awakening through her is about the truth revealed by that ache. Missing her may say, "I want her back." Awakening through her asks, "What kind of man was I when I had her presence?" Missing her may say, "I do not like this silence." Awakening through her asks, "How many times did my silence make her feel this way?" Missing her may say, "I need to know if she still cares." Awakening through her asks, "Did I care for her heart in a way that made her feel safe?" That shift is everything. Because ego can miss. The soul awakens. The ego misses what it received. The soul recognizes what it failed to honor. The ego misses comfort. The soul learns responsibility. The ego wants the old access back. The soul understands that access must now be earned through truth. This is why the divine feminine must be discerning. Because after a soul trigger, his energy may feel intense. He may come back emotional. He may say he has been thinking about her. He may admit he misses her. He may seem softer than before, more open, more affected. And all of that may be real. But real emotion is not the same as real transformation. Emotion can rise quickly. Transformation must be lived consistently. A man who misses her may reach out because the space became uncomfortable. A man who awakens through her reaches out because the space taught him something. A man who misses her may want reassurance. A man who awakens through her offers accountability. A man who misses her may say, "I miss you." A man who awakens through her may say, "I understand now how my silence affected you." These are different returns. And the difference matters. Because missing her can still be self-centered if it is only about his emotional experience. He misses how she made him feel. He misses being loved. He misses being understood. He misses the warmth, the attention, the devotion, the softness, the feeling of being seen. But awakening through her includes her experience too. He begins to ask what it was like for her to love him, what it cost her to keep understanding him, what confusion his silence created, what emotional labor she carried while he stayed hidden, what kind of pain his inconsistency placed in her body. That is when the trigger moves from ego pain into soul awareness. And soul awareness is what changes him. Because he is no longer only saying, "I hurt because you are gone." He is beginning to understand. "You hurt because I was not fully present." That is a sacred shift. It is not shame. It is responsibility. And responsibility is the beginning of real masculine awakening. Because missing her may make him want to return, but responsibility changes how he returns. Missing her may make him send a message. Responsibility makes him choose his words with care. Missing her may make him ask to talk. Responsibility makes him ready to listen. Missing her may make him want to reconnect. Responsibility makes him understand that reconnection requires trust, and trust requires consistent behavior over time. That is the difference. Missing is a feeling. Awakening is an orientation. It changes the direction of his energy. Before, he may have asked, "How do I get back what I lost?" After awakening, he begins asking, "How do I become capable of honoring what I lost?" That question is powerful because it moves him from possession into growth. And this is where the soul trigger becomes sacred. It is not meant to make him chase her because his ego panics. It is meant to make him grow because his soul recognizes truth. If he only misses her, he may return to restore the old dynamic. He may want her softness back, her attention back, her emotional availability back, her ability to understand him back. He may want to feel safe again inside her love without fully considering whether she felt safe inside his presence. But if he awakens through her, he returns with a different awareness. He understands that the old dynamic cannot continue. He understands that she is not the same woman. He understands that the connection cannot be rebuilt on hidden feelings and visible inconsistency. He understands that if he wants to come closer, he must become more emotionally honest than he was before. That is why a soul-triggered awakening feels different. It carries humility. Humility is one of the clearest signs that he is awakening through her, not simply missing her. The man who only misses her may still center himself. He may say, "I have been hurting." He may say, "I cannot stop thinking about you." He may say, "I feel like I lost something." He may say, "I did not realize how much I needed you." These words can be sincere, but they may still revolve around his pain. The man who awakens through her may include something more. He may say, "I know my silence hurt you." He may say, "I see that I kept making you carry the uncertainty." He may say, "I understand why you had to protect your peace." He may say, "I do not want to come back unless I can show up with more honesty than before." That is a different energy. It is not just longing. It is accountability. And accountability tells you that the trigger has reached more than his attachment. It has reached his conscience. That is important, because the soul trigger is not only about romantic emotion. It is about conscience waking up. The part of him that knows his actions had impact. The part of him that knows she deserved more clarity. The part of him that knows he used silence to avoid vulnerability. The part of him that knows if he returns without change, he may reopen a wound instead of healing it. When conscience awakens, the return becomes more careful. He may not rush in dramatically. He may not demand immediate access. He may not expect her to soothe his guilt. He may not try to erase the past with one emotional confession. Instead, he may approach with reverence. He may understand that her heart is not a place he can enter casually. He may understand that if he once mishandled her softness, he must now respect the boundaries protecting it. He may understand that his desire to return does not automatically override her need for safety. This is the difference between missing her and awakening through her. Missing her wants closeness. Awakening through her respects readiness. Missing her wants emotional relief. Awakening through her honors emotional repair. Missing her wants the door open. Awakening through her asks whether he has become responsible enough to walk through it. And this is where the divine feminine must stay rooted. Because sometimes, when he misses her, he may sound like the man she hoped he would become. He may be softer, more vulnerable, more expressive. He may say the words she longed to hear. He may finally admit that the connection mattered. He may finally acknowledge that he was affected. And her heart may want to melt. That is natural. But this is where she must listen with both love and wisdom. She must ask, is he only expressing emotion, or is he taking responsibility? Is he only saying he misses me, or is he acknowledging what happened? Is he only trying to regain comfort, or is he showing a willingness to rebuild trust? Is he only awakened by loss, or awakened to truth? These questions are sacred protection. They do not make her cold. They make her conscious. Because she has learned that the soul can recognize someone deeply and still need proof of maturity before reopening. She has learned that emotion can be real, but safety requires consistency. She has learned that a man can miss the feminine and still not be ready to meet the feminine. And she is allowed to require more than being missed. That sentence matters. She is allowed to require more than being missed. She is allowed to require clarity. She is allowed to require accountability. She is allowed to require emotional steadiness. She is allowed to require that his return honors the woman she has become, not only the woman he remembers. Because the woman he remembers may have chased. The woman she has become receives. The woman he remembers may have overexplained. The woman she has become knows her worth. The woman he remembers may have softened every silence. The woman she has become protects her peace. And if he is awakening through her, he will not resent that. He will respect it. He will understand that her boundaries are not obstacles to love. They are the conditions under which love can become safe. He will understand that her self-respect is not punishment. It is the result of what she learned. He will understand that if he wants to return different, he must meet her difference too. This is another sign of awakening. He does not demand the old version of her. He honors the new one. The man who only misses her may want her to become available like before. The man who awakens through her understands why she cannot. The man who only misses her may feel hurt by her boundaries. The man who awakens through her says, I understand why you need them. The man who only misses her may want instant closeness. The man who awakens through her is willing to rebuild slowly. This is the maturity she must look for. Because a true soul trigger does not only make him feel. It changes his relationship to love. Before, love may have been something he wanted to receive without being exposed. Now love becomes something he understands requires vulnerability. Before, love may have been something he could keep in silence. Now love becomes something he realizes must be honored through communication. Before, love may have been something he could approach when it was convenient. Now love becomes something he respects as sacred energy with limits, boundaries, and consequences. That is awakening through her. She becomes not just someone he misses, but someone whose presence revealed a lesson he can no longer ignore. She showed him where he was guarded. She showed him where he was passive. She showed him where he called fear peace. She showed him where he wanted love, but did not know how to become responsible to it. And when she stops chasing, the lesson becomes even clearer. Because he can no longer focus on her effort. He must focus on his own absence. This is why awakening through her may change him beyond the relationship itself. If the trigger truly works, he becomes more aware in general, more aware of how he handles emotion, more aware of how he avoids hard conversations, more aware of how he responds when someone offers love, more aware of how silence can wound, even when he did not intend to hurt. That is real transformation. It is not limited to one return. It becomes a change in consciousness. He may begin to realize that if he does not heal this pattern, he will carry it into every connection. He may see that running from vulnerability will keep recreating the same emptiness. He may understand that the problem is not that love is too much, but that his capacity to receive love needs to grow. That is when missing her becomes a doorway into becoming more whole. And this is the highest purpose of a soul trigger. Not just reunion. Evolution. The soul trigger asks him to become a man who can meet truth, a man who can stop hiding, a man who can hold emotional presence, a man who can protect softness instead of only longing for it after it leaves. That is awakening. But there is another layer for her. Because the difference between being missed and being met is one she must understand. Being missed can feel intoxicating. After feeling unseen, unheard, unchosen, or taken for granted, hearing that he misses her may feel like validation. It may feel like proof that the connection was real. It may feel like the emotional recognition she waited for. But being missed is not the same as being met. Being missed says, your absence affected me. Being met says, your heart matters to me, and I am willing to show up differently. Being missed says, I feel the loss. Being met says, I respect the healing required after the loss. Being missed may open a conversation. Being met builds a new foundation. That is what she must remember. Do not settle for being missed when your soul is asking to be met. Do not confuse longing with readiness. Do not confuse his pain with his transformation. Do not confuse his return with his capacity to stay. A soul-triggered man may come back different, but the difference must be lived. Over time. Through choices. Through consistency. Through how he handles discomfort after the first emotional wave passes. Because the real test is not whether he can return when longing is high. The real test is whether he can stay honest when fear rises again. Can he communicate when vulnerability becomes uncomfortable? Can he respect boundaries when they slow down access? Can he remain accountable after the apology? Can he keep showing up when the intensity fades and real emotional work begins? These are the signs of awakening through her. Not intensity. Integrity. Not longing. Responsibility. Not grand emotion. Steady presence. This is where the divine feminine must trust her own evolution. The old version of her may have accepted being missed as enough. The new version requires being met. The old version may have been relieved by his return. The new version listens for truth. The old version may have rushed to soften the space. The new version allows him to bring his part. This is not because she loves less. It is because she loves with more wisdom. And wisdom is part of her awakening. Because if he is truly awakening through her, he will not need her to abandon her wisdom, so he can feel comfortable. He will not ask her to become less discerning. He will not need her to erase the past overnight. He will understand that trust is rebuilt, not demanded. That is how you know he is different. He respects the process. He respects her pace. He respects the fact that the woman he triggered into self-respect is no longer available for old patterns. And if he cannot respect that, then he may miss her deeply, but he has not awakened deeply enough. That is a hard truth. But it is freeing, because it keeps her from being pulled back by emotion alone. She can honor his missing without surrendering to it. She can feel compassion for his longing without making it the center of her choices. She can appreciate his vulnerability without abandoning her boundaries. She can listen to his words while still watching his consistency. That is mature feminine discernment. And it is exactly what Chapter 7 is here to remind her. The difference between missing her and awakening through her is the difference between emotion and transformation. Missing her may bring him back. Awakening through her makes him return with humility, accountability, and a willingness to become different. Missing her may make him feel the loss. Awakening through her makes him understand the lesson. Missing her may focus on what he wants. Awakening through her includes what she deserves. That is the sacred truth. And if the soul trigger has truly changed him, he will know that he cannot return only because he misses her. He must return with truth. He must return with respect. He must return with the awareness that her heart is not a place to revisit when he feels empty. It is a sacred space that requires presence, care, and responsibility. That is where Chapter 7 leaves us, with the understanding that missing her is only the first door. Awakening through her is what happens when missing her becomes a mirror, when longing becomes accountability, and when the pain of her absence teaches him how to honor her presence. And if this chapter spoke to you, stay with me for Chapter 8. Because next we're going deeper into why he returns with a different energy, and how to recognize the subtle signs that this is not the same man simply coming back, but a man who has been changed by what he finally had to face. Chapter 8. Why he returns with a different energy. When he returns after a real soul trigger, something feels different. Not because he suddenly becomes perfect. Not because he has healed every wound. Not because he now knows exactly how to love without fear, hesitation, or uncertainty. But because the energy behind him has changed. That is where this chapter begins. Because before the trigger, he may have approached the connection from a place of avoidance. He may have come close when it felt safe and pulled away when it felt exposing. He may have offered warmth, then disappeared into silence. He may have sent small signals, but avoided deeper truth. He may have wanted access to her energy, but resisted the responsibility that access required. His old energy may have felt inconsistent. Warm, then cold. Present, then distant. Interested, then guarded. Tender, then unavailable. Open just enough to keep the connection alive, but not open enough to make it safe. And for the divine feminine, this kind of energy can be deeply confusing. Because she can feel there is something real beneath the surface, but the behavior does not create peace. She can sense the hidden feeling, but she still has to live with the visible inconsistency. She can feel his soul, but his human self may still be hiding behind the mask. But after a true soul trigger, if he has really faced something inside himself, he does not return with the exact same frequency. There is a different weight to him, a different humility, a different awareness, a different softness, a different caution, a different respect for the woman he is approaching. He may not say everything perfectly. He may not have the perfect confession. He may not come in with dramatic declarations or cinematic certainty. But something in his energy feels less performative, less defensive, less entitled, less casual, more aware that he is not returning to the same woman and not returning to the same connection. This is one of the first signs that the soul trigger changed him. He understands, even if quietly, that the old way will not work anymore. Before, he may have returned with vague warmth, expecting her to feel enough through the energy. Now, he understands that energy without clarity may no longer be enough. Before, he may have expected her to soften quickly because she loved deeply. Now, he understands that her softness has boundaries. Before, he may have thought a small message could reopen the old emotional door. Now he senses that the door is no longer opened by old patterns, but by truth. That awareness changes the way he comes forward. He may return more slowly. Not the old kind of slow that came from avoidance. A different kind of slow. A careful kind. The kind that knows words matter now. The kind that understands trust cannot be rushed. The kind that senses he must not come back simply to disturb her peace, because his own emotions became uncomfortable. This kind of slowness is not necessarily a red flag by itself. Sometimes it is reverence. Because when a man has truly been humbled by a soul trigger, he may feel the sacredness of the space he is entering. He may recognize that if he returns carelessly, he could repeat the very wound the trigger revealed. He may understand that her heart is not something to touch impulsively because he feels lonely one night. So he pauses. He reflects. He chooses his words more consciously. He may ask himself, am I reaching out because I want comfort? Or because I am ready to be honest? Am I missing her energy? Or am I ready to honor it? Am I returning to relieve my regret? Or am I returning with responsibility for what created that regret? These questions can create a different return. Because now the return is not only emotional. It is conscious. And conscious energy feels different. It does not push. It does not demand. It does not rush her into forgiveness. It does not expect immediate access. It does not try to erase the past because the present feeling is intense. It approaches with respect. That respect may show in small ways. He may acknowledge the time that has passed. He may not pretend nothing happened. He may not open with casual energy, as if the silence was meaningless. He may not act confused when she protects herself. He may not become defensive when she names the impact of what happened. Instead, he listens. And listening is often one of the clearest signs that his energy has changed. Because the old version of him may have avoided hearing her pain. He may have felt accused, pressured, overwhelmed, or exposed whenever she tried to express what his distance did to her. He may have retreated into silence because listening required him to feel responsible. But the changed version understands that listening is part of repair. He does not only want to be heard. He is willing to hear. He is willing to understand her side without immediately defending his own. He is willing to let her truth exist without turning it into an attack. He is willing to sit with the discomfort of impact. That is a different masculine energy. Because true masculine maturity can hold discomfort without running. It can hear, that hurt me, without collapsing into shame or rising into defensiveness. It can say, I understand, and mean, I am willing to let this affect how I show up now. This is one reason he returns different after the soul trigger. The trigger may have shown him that his silence was not harmless. It may have shown him that his absence had emotional consequences. It may have shown him that the woman he once expected to keep understanding has now learned to protect her peace. So when he returns, he cannot pretend impact does not exist. He must meet it. And if he is truly different, he will not expect her to ignore what happened just because he finally feels ready to talk. He will understand that readiness arriving late still needs humility. He may say, I know I should have communicated. I understand why you stepped back. I can see now that I left too much unsaid. I do not expect you to just forget that. I am not here to pressure you. I just want to be honest. These kinds of words may not be dramatic, but they carry maturity. Because they do not demand. They acknowledge. And acknowledgement is often the beginning of emotional repair. But the difference is not only in words. It is in the energy behind the words. A man can say the right words and still carry the old energy. He can apologize but still expect instant access. He can admit he misses her but still avoid deeper accountability. He can say he understands, but still become defensive when she speaks. He can confess emotion but still refuse consistency. That is why the divine feminine must feel beyond the words. Does his energy feel patient? Does it feel grounded? Does it respect her boundaries? Does it make space for her healing? Does it show awareness of the old pattern? Does it feel like he wants truth or only comfort? These questions matter because a different return is not proven by one emotional conversation. It is proven by the quality of his presence over time. Still, there are subtle signs that he may be returning from a changed place. First, he does not try to rewrite the past. The old version may have minimized everything. He may have said, "It was not that serious," or "You misunderstood," or "I was just busy," or "I did not mean anything by it." He may have made the issue smaller, so he would not have to feel the full weight of it. But the different version does not need to minimize. He may not understand everything perfectly, but he does not dismiss her reality. He can admit that something happened. He can admit that his silence had an effect. He can admit that he avoided. He can admit that he was afraid, overwhelmed, or emotionally unprepared, without using those things as excuses. That is important. A changed man can explain his fear without hiding behind it. He can say, "I was afraid," and also say, "But I understand that my fear still affected you." That is accountability. Second, he does not punish her for changing. This is a major sign. If he returns and resents her boundaries, resents her calm, resents her self-respect, or wants the old version of her back, then he may miss her, but he has not truly understood the trigger. Because the soul trigger should reveal why she changed. It should show him that her transformation was not betrayal. It was survival. It was healing. It was the natural result of giving too much to a dynamic that did not meet her with the same care. So if he returns different, he respects the woman she has become. He does not say, "You are cold now." He understands, "You are clearer now." He does not say, "You do not care anymore." He understands, "You learn to care for yourself too." He does not say, "Why are you not like before?" He understands, "The old way hurt you, and I cannot expect you to return to it." That is a powerful difference. Third, he becomes more willing to name what was once hidden. The old version may have lived in implication. A look, a sign, a half message, an energetic pull, a return without explanation. He may have expected her to sense what he could not say. But the different version understands that hidden feelings are not enough. He may begin naming things more directly. "I did miss you. I did think about what happened. I did avoid the conversation. I did not know how to handle how close it felt. I can see now that I pulled away instead of being honest." These words matter because they bring the invisible into reality. And love cannot mature if everything stays invisible. The awakened masculine begins to understand that if he wants a real connection, he cannot rely only on energy. He must bring words. He must bring presence. He must bring something that can be felt in reality, not only sensed in silence. Fourth, his return is less about panic and more about intention. A panic return feels urgent, chaotic, intense, and centered around his discomfort. He may reach out because he feels her slipping away. He may want immediate reassurance. He may need to know she still cares. He may bring emotional intensity but no real plan, no accountability, no patience. An intentional return feels different. It may still be emotional, but it has grounding. He is not only trying to relieve the ache. He is trying to meet the truth. He may say, "I wanted to speak because I have reflected." He may say, "I do not want to come back into your life carelessly." He may say, "I know trust would take time." He may say, "I am willing to move slowly if that is what feels safe." That is a different energy, because it shows he is thinking about the impact of his return, not only the intensity of his desire. Fifth, he respects pace. This is one of the clearest signs of maturity. The old version may have wanted her available when he was ready. He may have disappeared when he needed space, then returned expecting warmth when his own emotions opened again. He may not have considered that her heart had its own healing timeline. But the different version understands that her pace matters too. He does not pressure. He does not rush intimacy. He does not demand immediate forgiveness. He does not make her boundary proof that she does not love him. He understands that if she moves slowly, it may be because his old inconsistency taught her to be careful. And instead of resenting that, he accepts it. That is humility. Because humility says, I understand that my return does not erase your experience. And this humility is one of the strongest signs that he has been changed by the trigger. Sixth, he begins showing consistency in small ways. Not grand gestures. Not dramatic promises. Small consistency. He follows through. He communicates when he says he will. He does not disappear after vulnerability. He does not create emotional highs and then vanish into silence. He checks in with more care. He becomes more aware of how his behavior affects the connection. This is where the difference becomes real. Because energy can feel changed in the beginning, but consistency shows whether the change can survive time. A man can be awakened in a moment, but maturity is built through repeated choices. So if he returns different, the difference must slowly become visible in patterns. Not just in one conversation. Not just in one apology. Not just in one emotional opening. In the way he keeps choosing truth after the trigger is no longer fresh. That is the real test. Because soul triggers can create powerful emotional openings. But the nervous system may still try to return to the old pattern later. Fear may rise again. Vulnerability may feel risky again. The mask may try to rebuild itself again. The question is, what does he do then? Does he disappear again? Or does he communicate? Does he shut down? Or does he say, I am feeling overwhelmed, but I do not want to go silent this time? Does he become defensive? Or does he pause and listen? Does he recreate the old wound? Or does he practice a new response? That is how you know whether the different energy is becoming embodied. Because the man who returns different is not the man who never feels fear again. He is the man who starts handling fear differently. He is not the man who never gets overwhelmed. He is the man who stops using overwhelm as permission to disappear. He is not the man who has all the answers. He is the man who is willing to stay honest while finding them. That is the shift. And the divine feminine must learn to discern this shift with patience. Not suspicion. Not fantasy. Patience. She does not need to instantly reject him out of fear. She does not need to instantly accept him out of hope. She can observe. She can listen. She can feel her body. She can let time reveal whether his energy has truly changed. This is mature feminine discernment. It does not rush. It does not collapse. It does not punish. It simply allows reality to show itself. Because a truly different return can handle observation. A truly different man does not need immediate access to prove his sincerity. A truly different energy remains respectful even when she is cautious. A truly different return understands that trust is not owed. Trust is rebuilt. And if he is not truly different, that will reveal itself too. He may become impatient. He may resent the boundary. He may withdraw when he does not get immediate reassurance. He may return to vague communication. He may make his pain bigger than her healing. He may expect her to soothe him instead of taking responsibility. If that happens, she must not ignore it. Because sometimes the soul trigger creates only a temporary emotional opening. He feels the absence. He feels regret. He feels fear of loss. He returns. But once he receives comfort, the old pattern begins again. That is not a different energy. That is the old wound seeking relief. This is why Chapter 8 is not asking her to believe blindly. It is asking her to discern deeply. A different return will not only sound different. It will feel different in the body. Her nervous system may still be cautious, but she may feel more space, more clarity, more steadiness, less pressure to fix him, less pressure to carry the conversation alone. She may notice that he is bringing something real instead of waiting for her to do the emotional work. That matters. Because the woman who has healed cannot only listen to his words. She must listen to her body. Does his return create peace or urgency? Does it create clarity or confusion? Does it create mutual responsibility, or does it pull her back into overfunctioning? Does she feel invited into truth or pulled back into the old cycle? Her body will know, and she must honor what it tells her. Because the man who returns truly different will not ask her to betray her body to prove she trusts him. He will understand that her body remembers what happened. He will understand that her peace matters. He will understand that if he wants to rebuild, he must do so with care. That is what different energy looks like. It does not demand to be believed. It becomes trustworthy. Slowly. Through presence. Through humility. Through consistency. Through respect. Through the willingness to meet the woman she became after the soul trigger changed both of them. And this is the sacred truth. If he returns different, he is not returning to erase the past. He is returning because the past taught him something. He is not returning to recover the old dynamic. He is returning because the old dynamic revealed what must change. He is not returning to make her chase again. He is returning because he finally understands that love cannot be sustained by her chase and his avoidance. That is the return that carries potential. Not because it is perfect, but because it is honest. And honest love can grow. If both people are willing. He must be willing to stay accountable. She must be willing to stay discerning. He must bring changed behavior. She must not abandon the boundaries that helped her heal. He must respect the pace. She must trust herself enough not to rush from hope or close from fear. This is where a new dynamic can begin. Not the old dance. Not the old story. Not one chasing and one running. But two people standing closer to truth than they were before. That is the deeper possibility of a soul-triggered return. It does not guarantee reunion. It creates the possibility of conscious choice. And conscious choice is already different from unconscious pattern. For the divine feminine, let this be the message. If he returns different, you do not have to decide everything in one moment. You do not have to punish him. You do not have to rescue him. You do not have to reopen completely. You do not have to close forever. You can breathe. You can listen. You can observe whether his energy is truly rooted in responsibility. You can honor your heart and your boundaries at the same time. Because the woman you became through this journey deserves to be present in the decision. Not the wounded version who would accept any return. Not the anxious version who needed proof. Not the overgiving version who softened every boundary. The woman who has returned to herself. Let her decide. Let her feel. Let her observe. Let her receive only what is aligned. Because if he is truly different, he will be willing to meet that woman. And if he is not willing to meet her, then he may have returned, but he has not returned ready. That is the sacred truth of chapter 8. He returns with a different energy when the soul trigger has humbled him, shown him his pattern, cracked the mask, awakened regret, and made him understand that the old way can no longer work. His energy may feel more grounded, honest, patient, accountable, and respectful. He may speak with more care, listen with more humility, and approach her boundaries with more maturity. But the difference must become consistent. Because true change is not proven by intensity. It is proven by integrity. Not by how deeply he misses her, but by how responsibly he meets her. Not by how emotional his return is, but by whether his behavior begins to reflect the truth he claims to have seen. That is where chapter 8 leaves us. With the understanding that a soul-triggered return can feel different, but discernment is still sacred. Let the energy speak. Let the actions confirm. Let time reveal whether he is returning as the same man seeking comfort, or as a changed man learning how to love with truth. And if this chapter spoke to you, stay with me for chapter 9. Because next we are going deeper into how to know if his return is real or temporary, and why the strongest proof of transformation is not what he says when the trigger is fresh, but what he does after the emotion settles. Chapter 9. How to know if his return is real or temporary. Not every return is transformation. Sometimes it is only a reaction. That is where this chapter begins. Because after a soul trigger, the divine masculine may come back with emotion. He may return with words he never said before. He may seem softer, more vulnerable, more affected, more open than he used to be. He may admit that he has been thinking about her, He may say he misses her. He may say the silence felt different this time. He may say he finally understands that something between them was real. And maybe he means it. Maybe the trigger truly touched something. Maybe he is sincere in that moment. But sincerity in a moment is not the same as transformation over time. That is the distinction the divine feminine must understand. Because temporary returns can feel powerful. They can feel emotional. They can feel intense. They can feel spiritual. They can feel like everything she prayed for is finally happening. They can feel like confirmation that the connection was never one-sided. But a temporary return often comes from emotional discomfort, not mature responsibility. He feels the loss, so he reaches. He feels the absence, so he wants access. He feels the trigger, so he seeks relief. He feels regret, so he wants to be soothed. He feels her energy gone, so he tries to pull it back. But once the discomfort calms down, the old pattern may return. That is why this chapter is so important. Because the question is not only, did he return? The question is, what energy did he return with? Did he return with accountability? Or anxiety? Did he return with clarity? Or confusion dressed as vulnerability? Did he return with respect for her boundaries? Or a desire to bypass them because he is uncomfortable? Did he return because he is ready to meet the connection differently? Or because he wants the old access back? This is how she begins to know whether his return is real or temporary. A real return carries responsibility. A temporary return carries urgency. A real return says, I understand what happened, and I want to show up differently. A temporary return says, I feel something right now, and I need you to make me feel better. A real return respects time. A temporary return wants immediate emotional relief. A real return is willing to rebuild trust slowly. A temporary return wants to restore closeness quickly without fully addressing why trust was damaged. And this difference matters deeply. Because the woman who has been through the silence, the confusion, the chasing, the overgiving, the waiting, and the self-return cannot afford to mistake emotional intensity for emotional maturity. She has learned too much. She has become too aware. She has worked too hard to come home to herself. So when he returns, she must not only listen to his words. She must listen to his pattern. Because words can change quickly. Patterns reveal truth slowly. He may say, I miss you. But does he communicate consistently after saying it? He may say, I know I hurt you. But does he make space for her feelings without becoming defensive? He may say, I want to try again. But does he respect the pace required to rebuild safety? He may say, I am different now. But does his behavior become different when discomfort returns? That is the test. Not what he says when his heart is open, but what he does when fear rises again. Because a temporary return often happens when the emotional wave is high. He feels longing, regret, loss, or panic, and in that emotional state, he comes forward. But once he feels reassured, once he knows she still cares, once he receives the warmth he missed, his nervous system may relax, and the old avoidance may come back. He may become less consistent. He may become vague again. He may stop initiating. He may avoid deeper conversations. He may retreat once the connection asks for real responsibility. This is how temporary returns reveal themselves. They begin with intensity, but they fade when accountability is required. A real return is different. A real return may be quieter, steadier, less dramatic, but more grounded. It may not come with the most beautiful words. It may not arrive like a storm of emotion. It may not look like a perfect movie scene. But it has weight. It has integrity. It has follow-through. He does not only say he understands. He acts like he understands. He does not only say he respects her boundaries. He respects them when they inconvenience him. He does not only say he wants to communicate. He communicates when vulnerability feels uncomfortable, not only when longing feels strong. That is real change. Because real transformation is not proven when everything feels easy. It is proven when the old trigger appears and he chooses a new response. If he used to go silent when overwhelmed, does he now say, I need a little time, but I do not want to disappear? If he used to avoid emotional conversations, does he now stay present long enough to listen? If he used to become defensive when she expressed hurt, does he now pause and try to understand? If he used to expect her to chase, does he now initiate with clarity? If he used to treat her softness as guaranteed, does he now approach it with care? These are the signs of a real return. Not perfection, but conscious effort. Because a man who is truly different will still have moments of fear. He may still feel old patterns rise. He may still need to learn emotional skills he never learned before. He may still be imperfect in the way he communicates. But the difference is this: he does not use imperfection as an excuse to repeat harm. He becomes responsible for learning. He becomes responsible for repair. He becomes responsible for his own nervous system instead of making her carry the emotional consequences of his shutdown. That is what real transformation looks like. It is not flawless. It is accountable. And accountability is the strongest sign that his return is real. So what does accountability actually look like? It looks like acknowledging the impact of his actions without making excuses. Not simply, I was going through a lot. But, I was going through a lot, and I can see that my silence still hurt you. Not simply, I did not mean to make you feel that way. But, I understand that whether I meant to or not, my inconsistency affected your peace. Not simply, I am sorry you felt hurt. But, I am sorry for the ways I contributed to that hurt. This difference matters. Because a temporary return may apologize in a way that avoids ownership. A real return owns the behavior. A temporary return may say, I am sorry if you were hurt. A real return says, I am sorry I hurt you. A temporary return may say, you know I am not good with feelings. A real return says, I know I have not been good with feelings, and I am working on not letting that become silence. A temporary return may say, I was scared. A real return says, I was scared, but I understand fear does not excuse disappearing. That is maturity. And maturity sounds different. It feels different. It creates a different emotional environment. Because when someone takes real accountability, the other person does not have to fight to prove their pain was valid. She does not have to over-explain. She does not have to convince him that silence hurt. She does not have to make a case for why clarity mattered. He already understands that her experience matters. That is one sign of a real return. He does not make her carry the burden of proving what happened. Another sign is consistency. Consistency is not glamorous. It is not as dramatic as confession. It is not as exciting as a sudden emotional message. But consistency is what heals what inconsistency damaged. If his old pattern was hot and cold, consistency matters. If his old pattern was appearing and disappearing, consistency matters. If his old pattern was emotional intensity followed by silence, consistency matters. If his old pattern was making promises in vulnerable moments, but not living them later, consistency matters. A real return becomes more consistent over time. Not necessarily perfect every day, but noticeably more grounded. He follows through on what he says. He does not leave conversations unfinished without explanation. He does not disappear after emotional closeness. He makes an effort to communicate instead of forcing her to guess. He understands that trust is rebuilt through repeated evidence, not one emotional speech. A temporary return often lacks this. It may begin beautifully, but then the effort becomes uneven. The words become vague. The presence becomes inconsistent. The old confusion returns. And she finds herself back in the same emotional position. Wondering, waiting, interpreting, trying to understand what changed. If she is back in that same state, then the return may not have been real transformation. It may have been a temporary emotional opening. That is why her body is important. Her body will often know before her mind can explain. A real return may still feel tender and cautious, but it often brings more steadiness. She may feel careful, but not constantly anxious. She may feel emotional, but not mentally consumed. She may feel the need to move slowly, but not the desperate urge to decode everything. A temporary return often activates the old nervous system loop. She starts checking again. She starts wondering again. She starts overthinking again. She starts feeling like his energy is unclear again. She starts feeling responsible for keeping the connection emotionally alive again. That is information. Her body is saying, "This feels familiar." And familiar does not always mean safe. Sometimes familiar means the old pattern has returned wearing softer words. That is why discernment must be stronger than hope. Hope says, maybe this time is different. Discernment asks, what is different in reality? Hope says he sounds so sincere. Discernment asks, does sincerity become consistency? Hope says, he finally came back. Discernment asks, can he stay present? Hope says he misses me. Discernment asks, can he meet me? This is the wisdom she needs. Because the soul trigger may create an opening, but only sustained responsibility creates a new foundation. A third sign of a real return is respect for boundaries. This is crucial. A man who returns temporarily may like her boundaries at first because they make her seem strong, mysterious, or more desirable. But when those boundaries slow down access, he may become frustrated. He may pressure her. He may say she is being difficult. He may make her feel guilty for not trusting immediately. He may interpret her caution as rejection. That is not real transformation. A man who returns differently understands that boundaries are part of repair. He does not expect the same access he had before. He does not demand the softness he once failed to protect. He does not punish her for being careful. He does not make her self-respect the problem. Instead, he may say, I understand why you need time. I respect that you are protecting your peace. I do not expect things to go back to how they were overnight. I know I need to show consistency, not just say the right thing. This kind of respect matters, because it shows he is not only thinking about what he wants. He is considering what she needs to feel safe. That is a sign of real masculine growth. A temporary return is often centered on his need for reassurance, his need for relief, his need for access, his need to know she still cares. A real return includes her needs too. Her need for clarity, her need for time, her need for trust to be rebuilt, her need for emotional safety, her need to not be pulled back into a pattern that once hurt her. That inclusion is a sign of maturity. Because immature love says, I feel this, so respond to me. Mature love says, I feel this, and I also respect your experience. A fourth sign is whether he can talk about the pattern, not just the feeling. Temporary returns often focus on emotion. I missed you. I thought about you. I could not forget you. I still feel connected to you. These things may be true, but they are not enough. A real return is willing to talk about the pattern, the silence, the avoidance, the inconsistency, the emotional labor, the fear, the way the connection became imbalanced. Because without naming the pattern remains in the room, hidden, waiting, ready to repeat. A man who is truly different understands that the issue was not only that he missed her. The issue was how he handled what he felt. The issue was how he allowed fear to guide his behavior. The issue was how he let her carry too much while he stayed protected. So he is willing to look at that. Not endlessly. Not dramatically. But honestly. He can say, I see that I withdraw when I feel overwhelmed. He can say, I know I have used silence instead of communication. He can say, I realize I let you do too much emotional work. He can say, I do not want to repeat that. This is meaningful because he is no longer treating the return as a romantic reset. He is treating it as a chance to become conscious. That is what makes a real return different. It does not try to erase the old chapter. It learns from it. A temporary return may want to skip the uncomfortable parts and go straight back to closeness. But a real return understands that closeness without truth will eventually recreate the same wound. So he becomes willing to build differently. Slowly. Honestly. With respect for the fact that the old pattern must not be revived. A fifth sign is whether he is willing to do inner work even if she does not immediately give him what he wants. This is one of the clearest tests. If his growth depends entirely on whether she rewards him with access, then the growth may not be fully rooted. If he becomes accountable only when he thinks it will bring her back, but becomes resentful when she moves slowly, then his return may be more about outcome than transformation. A real return shows growth that belongs to him. He wants to become better because he has seen the truth, not only because he wants a result. He begins reflecting, healing, communicating, and taking responsibility because he does not want to remain the same man who caused the same pain. That is different. A temporary return says, "I will change if it gets me access." A real return says, "I need to change because I see what the old way cost." A temporary return is motivated by fear of loss. A real return is motivated by integrity. That is a deeper masculine shift. Because fear of loss may bring him back. But integrity is what keeps him growing. And this is where the divine feminine must be very honest with herself. Is he growing only when he fears losing her? Or is he growing because he has met something true within himself? If she pulls back, does he become conscious only long enough to regain connection? Or does he continue becoming responsible even when things are uncertain? This matters because real growth does not only appear when the reward is guaranteed. It continues because truth has become important to him. A sixth sign is whether he respects the woman she has become. If he returns wanting the old version of her, the one who chased, waited, over-explained, forgave quickly, and kept the emotional door open no matter what, then he may not be ready for the new dynamic. A real return understands that she has changed. And he does not resent it. He does not say, "You used to be softer." He recognizes, "You are protecting the softness I did not protect." He does not say, "You are different now." He recognizes, "You became different because the old dynamic hurt you." He does not say, "Why are you so guarded?" He recognizes, "Trust needs time because I helped create the need for caution." That recognition is powerful, because it means he is not only returning to a memory, he is returning to the woman in front of him now. And that woman requires truth. She requires respect. She requires a connection that does not ask her to abandon everything she learned. If he is real, he will not ask her to become unhealed so he can feel comfortable again. He will meet her healing. That is a sign of maturity. A temporary return often wants the benefits of her transformation without honoring the process that created it. He may be drawn to her new energy, her peace, her boundaries, her magnetism, but still want access without earning trust. A real return knows the new woman cannot be accessed through old behavior. That is the difference. And finally, the strongest sign of a real return is changed behavior after the emotion settles. This is the heart of Chapter 9. Because when the soul trigger is fresh, emotions may be high. He may feel everything intensely. He may be more open than usual. He may say things from a place of genuine feeling. But what happens after the wave passes? What happens a week later? A month later? When life gets busy? When fear rises? When intimacy asks for consistency? When a hard conversation is needed? When she does not immediately respond the way he hoped? When vulnerability feels uncomfortable again? That is where real transformation is revealed. Not in the emotional high. In the ordinary choices after. Does he keep showing up? Does he keep communicating? Does he keep respecting boundaries? Does he keep taking responsibility? Does he keep practicing a new way even when the old way would be easier? Because the old pattern often returns through ordinary moments. Not dramatic ones. A delayed response. A difficult conversation. A feeling of exposure. A moment of insecurity. A misunderstanding. A need for clarity. That is when the real test comes. A man who is temporarily triggered may fall back into silence. A man who is truly transforming may pause, notice the old urge, and choose differently. He may say, "I feel myself shutting down, but I do not want to disappear. I need some time to process, but I will come back to this conversation. I know this is hard, but I am listening. I can see why that would trigger you, and I want to understand." These are not perfect words. They are responsible words. They show that he is learning to stay present with discomfort. And that is one of the clearest signs that the soul trigger has become real growth. For the divine feminine, this chapter is not about becoming suspicious of every return. It is about becoming wise. You can receive his words with compassion. You can feel his emotion. You can honor that something may have shifted. But you do not have to surrender your discernment just because he came back. You do not have to collapse into the old version of yourself. You do not have to reopen every door before time has shown you whether the new energy is stable. You can move slowly. You can ask questions. You can observe patterns. You can let consistency prove what intensity promises. That is not fear. That is self-respect. Because the woman who has healed understands that love must be both felt and lived. It must be spoken and practiced. It must be emotional and responsible. It must be spiritual and embodied. If he returns with beautiful emotion but no stable behavior, then the return may feel meaningful, but it may not be safe. If he returns with fewer words but more consistency, more humility, more respect, and more willingness to build trust, then something real may be unfolding. Let reality show you. Do not let fantasy decide too quickly. Do not let fear reject too quickly. Do not let longing accept too quickly. Stay present. Stay in your body. Stay connected to the woman you became. Because the right return will not require you to abandon her. The right return will respect her. The right return will understand that your boundaries are not obstacles. They are the sacred structure that allows love to become healthy. And if his return is real, it will not be threatened by your self-respect. It will be refined by it. A real return can stand in truth. A temporary return cannot. A real return can handle slow rebuilding. A temporary return needs quick reassurance. A real return respects your peace. A temporary return wants access to your energy. A real return becomes consistent. A temporary return fades after the trigger calms down. That is the difference. And you are allowed to wait long enough to see it. That is the sacred truth of Chapter 9. You know if his return is real or temporary by watching whether emotion becomes responsibility. A real return carries accountability, consistency, respect for boundaries, willingness to talk about the pattern, and change behavior after the emotional intensity fades. A temporary return carries urgency, vague emotion, discomfort, guilt, panic, or the desire to regain access without doing the deeper work. The soul trigger may open the door, but his choices after the trigger reveal whether he is truly different. And your choices matter too. Do not accept a return only because it is emotional. Receive only what is truthful, mature, respectful, and aligned. Do not abandon the woman you became just because the man who left returns with softer words. Let him show whether those words have roots. Let time reveal whether his return is a moment or a transformation. Let your body tell you whether the connection now feels safer, clearer, and more mutual. Because you deserve more than being missed. You deserve to be met. That is where Chapter 9 leaves us. With the understanding that the strongest proof of transformation is not what he says when the trigger is fresh, but what he does after the emotion settles. And if this chapter spoke to you, stay with me for Chapter 10. Because next we bring everything together with when the trigger becomes a turning point for both souls, and why the final message is this. Truth changes everything, but only when both people are willing to live from it. Chapter 10. When the trigger becomes a turning point for both souls. A soul trigger does not only change the one who returns. It changes the one who receives. That is where the final chapter begins. Because when he returns after this soul trigger, the story is not only about whether he has changed. It is also about whether she has changed. It is about whether both souls are willing to meet the truth that the trigger revealed. It is about whether the connection can rise into something more conscious, or whether it will repeat the same pattern with softer words and familiar wounds. Because the soul trigger may have cracked his mask. It may have shown him what he took for granted. It may have forced him to face his avoidance. It may have awakened regret. It may have made the old story impossible to believe. It may have brought him back with a different energy. But the deeper question is this: what happens now? Does the trigger become a turning point? Or does it become another emotional moment that fades back into the old cycle? That is the choice. Because a soul trigger is not the destination. It is the doorway. It opens something. It reveals something. It shakes the old pattern so deeply that both people can finally see what was hidden. But once the door opens, both souls must decide whether they are willing to walk through it with honesty. For him, the turning point begins when he stops using the trigger as a reason to seek comfort and starts using it as a call to become responsible. He must ask, what did this trigger show me about myself? What did I avoid? What did I take for granted? What did my silence create? What kind of man must I become if I want to love without repeating the same wound? These questions are not easy, but they are sacred, because they move him from emotion into transformation. He may have returned because he missed her, but now he must become honest enough to understand that missing her is not enough. He may have returned because regret opened his heart, but now he must understand that regret must become repair. He may have returned because the mask cracked, but now he must choose not to rebuild the same mask once vulnerability feels uncomfortable again. That is his turning point. Not the return itself. The choice after the return. Will he communicate when silence feels easier? Will he stay present when vulnerability rises? Will he respect her boundaries when they slow down access? Will he stop expecting her to carry the emotional labor? Will he let the trigger mature him into a man who can protect what he once failed to honor? That is the real question. Because if he returns only to recover the old access, then the soul trigger has not become transformation yet. It has only become longing. If he returns only because he is afraid of losing her, then the trigger has touched his attachment, but not necessarily his responsibility. If he returns only to hear that she still cares, then he may be seeking reassurance, not growth. But if he returns with humility, accountability, and a willingness to become different, then the trigger has become a doorway into awakening. And that doorway matters. Because the divine masculine who truly changes through a soul trigger does not come back to restart the old story. He comes back because he can no longer live inside it. He knows the old version of himself was not enough. He knows hidden feelings were not enough. He knows silence did not protect the connection. He knows her softness was sacred. He knows her boundaries are not the enemy. He knows the woman who has returned to herself cannot be met by the same energy that once made her leave. And so, if he is truly changed, he does not ask her to become the old version of herself. He meets the woman she has become. That is important. Because for her, the turning point begins when she realizes his return does not require her to abandon her healing. She can listen, but she does not have to collapse. She can feel compassion, but she does not have to carry his regret. She can honor that he may have changed, but she does not have to ignore the fact that trust takes time. She can feel the love, but she does not have to sacrifice her peace to prove that the love was real. This is her turning point. She must ask, am I receiving truth, or am I being pulled back into hope? Am I seeing consistent change, or only emotional intensity? Am I honoring my body, my pace, and my boundaries? Am I responding from alignment, or from the old fear of losing him? Am I willing to let time reveal what is real? These questions protect her. Because the soul trigger may have changed him, but it should not make her forget what she learned. She learned that hidden feelings are not enough. She learned that spiritual connection needs emotional responsibility. She learned that love without consistency can still hurt. She learned that being deeply missed is not the same as being deeply met. She learned that her softness is sacred, and sacred things must be protected. So when he returns, she must not hand the old version of herself back to him just because he finally feels something. She must receive from the woman she has become. The woman who no longer chases. The woman who no longer overexplains. The woman who no longer mistakes intensity for safety. The woman who can love deeply and still move slowly. The woman who trusts that truth does not need to rush. That is her power. And if he is truly different, he will respect that power. He will not ask her to soften faster than her body feels safe. He will not ask her to erase the past because he has finally understood it. He will not resent the boundaries that now protect the heart he once took for granted. He will understand that her caution is not rejection. It is wisdom. He will understand that her pace is not punishment. It is healing. He will understand that if he wants a new beginning, he must honor the woman who survived the old ending. That is mature love. And this is where the trigger can become a turning point for both souls. For him, the trigger becomes the moment he stops running from truth. For her, the trigger becomes the moment she stops running back to potential without evidence of maturity. For him, the trigger becomes a mirror of his avoidance. For her, the trigger becomes a mirror of her self-abandonment. For him, the lesson is responsibility. For her, the lesson is discernment. For him, the path is to stop hiding. For her, the path is to stop chasing. And if both people honor their lessons, something new can become possible. Not the old cycle. Not the familiar dance where one reaches and the other retreats. Not the emotional pattern where he disappears and she explains. Not the spiritual fantasy where hidden feelings are treated as enough while real behavior remains inconsistent. Something new. A connection built on truth. A connection where love is not used as an excuse to avoid growth. A connection where emotion becomes communication. A connection where regret becomes responsibility. A connection where boundaries are respected, not resented. A connection where both people understand that the soul trigger was not meant to create drama. It was meant to create awakening. But awakening must be lived. This is where many connections fail. Not because the trigger was not real. Not because the feelings were not real. Not because the souls did not recognize each other. But because recognition alone does not build a healthy connection. Recognition opens the door. Maturity walks through it. Love may bring two people back into each other's awareness. But responsibility determines whether they can stay without repeating the same pain. That is the truth. A man can be deeply triggered and still not be ready. A woman can feel his change and still need more time. Two souls can love each other and still need healing before the connection becomes safe. And accepting that truth is not a failure. It is wisdom. Because true love does not demand that you ignore reality. True love does not ask you to abandon discernment. True love does not pressure you to call something healed just because it has become emotional. True love can wait for truth. True love can move slowly. True love can say, I feel this, but I will not rush beyond what is safe. True love can say, I honor the connection, but I also honor the growth required to sustain it. This is the deeper message of the soul trigger. It is not only here to bring him back. It is here to reveal whether both people are ready to meet the connection differently. Because if he comes back with the same avoidance, the trigger has not become a turning point. If she returns to the same self-abandonment, the trigger has not become a turning point. If he says the right words but does not change his behavior, the old pattern is still alive. If she ignores her body and rushes back because she is afraid of losing him, the old pattern is still alive. The turning point happens when both people choose truth over pattern. He chooses truth over the mask. She chooses truth over the chase. He chooses responsibility over silence. She chooses discernment over fantasy. He chooses presence over avoidance. She chooses self-respect over emotional urgency. That is when the trigger becomes sacred. Because it does not simply reunite two people. It awakens two people. And maybe that is the real purpose. Not to force a perfect outcome. Not to guarantee a reunion. Not to make her wait forever. Not to make him suffer until he returns. But to bring both souls face to face with what must change. The soul trigger says to him, you cannot keep hiding from love and calling it peace. It says to her, you cannot keep chasing love and calling it devotion. It says to him, if you want access, bring responsibility. It says to her, if you want love, do not abandon your own safety. It says to both, truth changes everything, but only if you are willing to live from it. That is the center of this final chapter. Truth changes everything. Not emotion alone. Not chemistry alone. Not longing alone. Not silence. Not return. Truth. The truth of what happened. The truth of what hurt. The truth of what was avoided. The truth of what must be rebuilt. The truth of what each person must become now. And truth is not always dramatic. Sometimes truth is simple. I was afraid. I was hurt. I disappeared. I overgave. I took you for granted. I lost myself trying to keep this alive. I want to do this differently. I need to see consistency before I can trust again. These truths may feel vulnerable, but they are the soil where something real can grow. Without truth, the return becomes another loop. With truth, the return becomes a choice. And conscious choice is where love becomes mature. Because mature love does not say, let us pretend nothing happened. Mature love says, let us be honest about what happened so we do not recreate it. Mature love does not say, my feelings should be enough. Mature love says, my feelings must become care, consistency, and responsibility. Mature love does not say, if you love me, you will forget the pain. Mature love says, if I love you, I will respect the healing that pain requires. That is the kind of love a soul trigger is trying to awaken. Not desperate love. Not fantasy love. Not love that survives only through one person carrying everything. But conscious love. Love with a spine. Love with a heart. Love with truth at the center. And if he returns different, this is what he must bring. Not perfection, but sincerity with action. Not a grand promise, but steady proof. Not emotional intensity, but emotional responsibility. Not a desire to own her energy again, but a willingness to honor it. And if she receives him, this is what she must bring. Not punishment, but discernment. Not resentment, but boundaries. Not blind hope, but grounded observation. Not the old chase, but the new self-respect that her healing has given her. That is how both souls change. And if they cannot meet there, then the trigger still served a purpose. It showed her what she deserves. It showed him what he avoided. It showed the truth of the pattern. It revealed that love cannot survive through longing alone. It gave both people the opportunity to grow, even if they grow in different directions. That is not a loss. That is awakening. Because sometimes the soul trigger brings two people back together in a healthier way. And sometimes the soul trigger teaches one person to finally let go with peace. Both can be sacred. The goal is not to force the connection into the shape the ego wants. The goal is to let truth reveal the path the soul needs. If the path is reunion, let it be built with maturity. If the path is release, let it be blessed with wisdom. If the path is slow rebuilding, let it be guided by patience. If the path is separation, let it be honored as part of the healing. Because the soul does not waste triggers. Every trigger reveals something. Every trigger teaches something. Every trigger asks for a more honest version of you. And that is why this final chapter must end with empowerment. If he returns different after this soul trigger, do not meet him as the old version of yourself. Meet him as the woman who learned. The woman who knows that her heart is sacred. The woman who knows that love needs responsibility. The woman who knows that words matter, but patterns matter more. The woman who knows that being missed is not enough. The woman who knows that she deserves to be met. Let him show you who he is now. Not through urgency. Through consistency. Not through emotion. Through integrity. Not through promises. Through the way he handles your boundaries, your pace, your truth, and your healing. And let yourself stay present. Do not rush to reject what may be real. Do not rush to accept what may still be temporary. Breathe. Observe. Listen to your body. Let time reveal whether the trigger created a moment or a transformation. Because what is true will not need to be forced. What is mature will not need you to abandon yourself. What is aligned will respect the woman you became while healing. And what is meant for your soul will not require you to betray your peace to receive it. So let the trigger become a turning point. For him, into responsibility. For you, into deeper self-trust. For the connection, into truth. And if truth brings you together, let it be different this time. Let it be honest. Let it be safe. Let it be grounded. Let it be built by two people who are no longer hiding from what love requires. And if truth leads you away, let that also be sacred. Because sometimes the most awakened ending is the one where you finally stop abandoning yourself. And sometimes the most powerful reunion is not with him. It is with you. That is the final message. He may return different after the soul trigger. But you must also remain different after your healing. Do not go back to the version of yourself who had to chase to feel chosen. Do not go back to the version who accepted silence as love. Do not go back to the version who ignored her body because her soul felt a bond. Do not go back to the version who made potential more important than peace. You are allowed to receive love. But receive the love that can meet your truth. Receive the love that respects your boundaries. Receive the love that comes with accountability. Receive the love that does not require you to disappear from yourself. Because truth changes everything. And when two souls are willing to live from truth, the old pattern can finally end. If this message spoke to your heart, write in the comments. Truth changes everything. Like this video if it gave you clarity. Subscribe to the channel for more divine masculine, divine feminine, twin flame, soul connection, and emotional awakening insights. And share this message with someone who needs to remember. A return is only sacred when it comes with truth.
Thank you for spending this moment with me. If this message resonated with your soul, remember to subscribe and continue this journey with us here on Twin Flame Journey. And always remember, what is meant for your soul will always find its way back to you. Until next time, beautiful soul, trust the journey.